Picture this, a lone scholar, hunched over a flickering candle in a stone-walled chamber, his eyes tracing cryptic symbols on a crumbling parchment. The year could be 1450 or perhaps 1380, but the frustration on his face is timeless. The same expression you might wear trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. He is one in a long line of brilliant minds, stretching across centuries, who have stared into the abyss of the ancient past and been met with only silence and riddles. These are not simple gaps in our history books. They are profound, deliberate enigmas left behind by civilizations long gone, puzzles that have stubbornly resisted every attempt at a solution, from the sharpest medieval intellects to our most powerful modern technologies. The mysteries of the ancient world are more than just historical footnotes. They are a direct challenge to our understanding of human capability and the very fabric of our past. They whisper of lost knowledge, of cultures that achieved the seemingly impossible, and of stories that remain tantalizingly out of reach. This enduring allure, this blend of intellectual frustration and profound wonder, is what draws us in, connecting us across time to that scholar in his chamber, sharing in his quest for answers. Today, we embark on a journey to explore the most compelling of these unsolved riddles, the ones that continue to captivate historians, archaeologists, and dreamers alike. We will venture beyond the familiar tales and into the heart of genuine, unresolved phenomena that defy straightforward explanation. From massive structures built with an almost supernatural precision to texts written in languages no one can decipher, from artifacts that seem to belong to another time to legends that might just hold a kernel of startling truth, these mysteries force us to question what we think we know. This video is your guide through 30 of the greatest enigmas ever left behind by the ancient world. We will walk in the footsteps of explorers and academics, sifting through the evidence and examining the leading theories, all while embracing the simple, thrilling fact that some secrets are not so easily surrendered. This is not just a list of unanswered questions. It is an invitation to experience the thrill of the hunt, to feel the weight of history's greatest puzzles, and to join a conversation that has been ongoing for 1,000 years. So prepare to have your curiosity ignited and your imagination stretched as we begin our countdown of the ancient world's most baffling and enduring mysteries. Our journey begins not with a towering monument of stone, but with a small, unassuming book that fits in your hands. This is the Voynich Manuscript, and it is arguably the most stubborn literary puzzle ever created. Imagine a volume of about 240 pages, each one filled from edge to edge with elegant, looping characters from an alphabet that doesn't match any known language on Earth. The text flows in a seemingly logical, structured way with clear word breaks and repeating phrases, suggesting it is a real language or a complex code, not random gibberish. But for over a century of intense study by the world's top cryptographers, including code breakers from both world wars who successfully cracked enemy ciphers, this text has yielded exactly nothing. Its words remain a perfect, unbreakable cipher, and the text is only half the mystery. The pages are illustrated with bewildering images that only deepen the enigma. There are hundreds of paintings of plants that are utterly unidentifiable. They possess features from known species combined in impossible, fantastical ways, as if the artist was depicting flora from another world or a lost branch of botany. Other sections show intricate astrological charts with zodiac symbols arranged in unfamiliar, non-standard patterns, and perhaps most strangely, pages filled with what appear to be biological or anatomical diagrams of tiny, nude women bathing in a bizarre, interconnected system of green, tub-like vessels. The origin of this strange object is itself a shadowy tale. It first appears definitively in the historical record in the late 16th century, when it was purchased by Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II for 600 gold ducats, an enormous sum, suggesting it was believed to be a work of profound importance. For centuries, its authorship was a guess, but modern science has given us one solid anchor point. Radiocarbon dating performed on the vellum pages has definitively placed its creation between 1404 and 1438, firmly in the early 15th century. This fact alone demolishes many modern hoax theories, confirming the manuscript is a genuine medieval artifact. So, what is it? The theories are as varied as they are compelling. Some argue it is an encoded scientific or medical text, perhaps written by a secretive alchemist to protect precious knowledge about herbal remedies or astronomical discoveries from the prying eyes of the Church. Others propose it is a deliberately constructed philosophical nonsense text, a medieval work of abstract art meant to provoke thought or simply to be beautiful in its mystery. There is a theory that it was written in a constructed language, a private tongue for a specific, small community. And then there is the hoax hypothesis that some clever forger created it centuries ago to sell to a wealthy, gullible patron like Emperor Rudolf. But if it is a hoax, it is a work of staggering, tedious commitment, requiring years of labor to fill every page with consistent, unique text and illustrations, all for a payoff that would have been highly uncertain. The Voynich Manuscript is a locked door for which no key has ever been found. It sits in a vault at Yale University's Baghdad Library, a silent, beautiful, and profoundly frustrating testament to the limits of our understanding, a puzzle that has humbled geniuses for generations and continues to dare anyone to uncover its secret. From the silent, indecipherable text of the Voynich Manuscript, we travel to the depths of the sea, where a lump of corroded bronze and wood revealed a technological shockwave that fundamentally altered our perception of ancient genius. In the year 1901, sponge divers were forced by a storm to take shelter near the tiny Greek island of Antikythera. While exploring the treacherous waters, they stumbled upon the wreck of a Roman-era cargo ship, littered with magnificent statues and artifacts. Amid the marble and bronze masterpieces, they recovered what appeared to be an unimpressive, heavily encrusted lump of metal. It seemed like just another piece of junk, and for nearly a year it sat in a crate at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, largely ignored. But then, a sharp-eyed archaeologist noticed that a crack in the corrosion revealed something astonishing inside, a complex arrangement of finely machined gear wheels. This was no simple ornament, it was a machine. After decades of painstaking cleaning, analysis, and more recently, advanced three-dimensional X-ray imaging, we now understand that this object, known as the Antikythera Mechanism, is the world's oldest known analog computer. Dated to between 250 BC and 100 BC, it is a sophisticated orrery, a mechanical model of the solar system operated by a hand crank. Its intricate system of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, housed in a wooden case no larger than a shoebox, could calculate the movements of the sun, the moon, and likely the 5 known planets with stunning accuracy. Dials on its front and back faces could predict lunar and solar eclipses, track the cycles of the ancient Olympic Games, and even account for the subtle irregularities of the moon's orbit using an ingenious pin and slot mechanism that replicated a mathematical principle not formally understood for another 1800 years. This is the heart of the profound mystery. The mechanism demonstrates a level of mechanical engineering and astronomical understanding that we simply did not believe existed in the Hellenistic world. The craftsmanship of its tiny, precisely cut teeth and its complex differential gearing is comparable to that of an 18th-century Swiss clock. It represents a technological peak, a flash of brilliance that seems to have come from nowhere. And this is what makes the Antikythera Mechanism so deeply puzzling. It is utterly alone. We have found nothing else like it from the ancient world. No other device of such complexity appears in the archaeological record, and no descriptions of anything similar survive in the vast body of classical literature that has come down to us. It is a single, solitary data point, a ghost from a lost technological tradition. who built this marvel, the leading theory points to the school of thought connected to Archimedes in Syracuse, as ancient texts describe him creating a planetarium, but no direct link has been proven. Perhaps it was a product of the Great Library and Museum of Alexandria, a center of learning where the brightest minds of the age collaborated. The device's very existence forces us to rewrite history, suggesting that the ancient Greeks were not merely great philosophers and mathematicians, but also master engineers capable of creating technology that would not be seen again until the dawn of the Renaissance. Its discovery on a Roman ship also hints at a tantalizing possibility. Was this a unique prototype, the prized possession of a wealthy patron, or was it merely one of many such devices, a product of a small but thriving workshop whose other creations were lost to time, melted down for their bronze, or still lie hidden in an undiscovered shipwreck? The Antikythera Mechanism stands as a stark and humbling reminder of the fragility of knowledge, a single surviving whisper from a conversation about mechanics and the cosmos that we never knew was happening, forcing us to wonder what other peaks of human achievement simply vanished, leaving no trace behind. Moving from a technological marvel lost at sea, we now turn to a mystery written not in bronze or parchment, but in the silent absence of 5,000 men. In the misty northern reaches of Roman Britain, stationed at the fortress of Eboracum, what we now call York, stood the Legio Nona Hispana, the 9th Spanish Legion. This was not some fledgling unit. It was a battle-hardened force, a veteran of the Gallic Wars under Julius Caesar, and a key player in the Roman conquest of Britain. For over a century, the 9th was a permanent fixture of the imperial military machine, its history well documented on stone inscriptions and in the official records of the Roman Empire. And then, without fanfare or clear explanation, it simply disappeared from history. The last definitive, datable evidence of its existence places it in Britain around the year 120 AD, during the reign of Emperor Hadrian. After that point, all mention of the 9th Legion in any Roman document, military roster, or inscription ceases entirely. It is as if the earth or the tumultuous British moors opened up and swallowed it whole. The sudden and complete vanishing of such a significant military formation comprising over 5,000 heavily armed and highly trained legionaries, plus cavalry and support staff, is an historical anomaly that has fueled speculation and scholarly debate for centuries. The core of the mystery lies in the fact that the Roman military bureaucracy was famously meticulous. Legions were assets, and their movements, battles, and even their disbandments were recorded. For a legion to simply vanish from the rolls implies a catastrophic and potentially embarrassing event that someone, perhaps, did not want fully documented. One of the most enduring and dramatic theories, popularized by numerous novels and films, suggests the legion was annihilated in a massive, bloody uprising among the northern British tribes. The early 2nd century was a time of great unrest in Britain, and historical sources like the Roman historian Cassius Dio mention a great war there around the year 117 AD. Proponents of this theory paint a picture of the 9th marching north from York to put down a rebellion by the Caledonians, the fierce tribes of modern-day Scotland, only to be ambushed and wiped out in the dense forests or rolling hills, their iconic eagle standard lost forever. It's a compelling, tragic end, a tale of imperial arrogance meeting a determined indigenous resistance. Yet there is a significant problem with this scenario, a complete lack of archaeological evidence. While we have found evidence of smaller Roman military defeats in Britain, no single battlefield site has been discovered containing the remains of thousands of Roman soldiers and their equipment that would corroborate the destruction of an entire legion. The second major theory argues that the 9th was not destroyed in Britain at all, but was transferred to another troubled frontier of the vast empire. Some fragmentary evidence suggests that detachments of the 9th might have been sent to the Rhine River in Germania or even to the distant province of Judea, which was erupting in the bloody Bar Kokhba revolt from 132 to 136 AD. If the entire legion was sent east and was destroyed in that brutal, large-scale conflict, its demise would explain its disappearance. The chaos of such a war, combined with the immense distance from Rome, could account for the loss of clear records. However, this theory also relies on incomplete data, and no concrete proof like a mass grave or a specific mention of the Ninth's participation in the Bar Kokhba revolt has ever been confirmed. A third, less cinematic but equally plausible possibility is that the legion was simply disbanded. Legions were occasionally dissolved as punishment for cowardice in battle or for backing the wrong contender in a civil war. If the Ninth suffered a humiliating but not total defeat or was implicated in a failed coup, Emperor Hadrian might have chosen to disband the unit Damnatio Memoriae, erasing its memory as an official punishment. The surviving soldiers would have been scattered to other units or dismissed in disgrace, and the legion's number would have been permanently retired from the army list. This act of bureaucratic erasure would explain the complete absence of subsequent records, transforming a military disgrace into an enduring historical puzzle. The fate of the Ninth Legion remains one of Rome's greatest secrets precisely because all the theories are plausible, yet each is frustratingly unproven. It is a ghost story written in the empty space between lines of text on a crumbling piece of papyrus, a reminder that even the most powerful and documented empires could lose a piece of their own soul to the fog of history, leaving behind only a question mark where 5,000 men once stood. Within the cold, formidable walls of the Tower of London in the summer of 1483, a political drama unfolded that would etch itself into history not with a bang but with a haunting, unresolved whisper. The key players were two boys, 12-year-old Edward V, the newly proclaimed king, and his younger brother, 9-year-old Richard, the Duke of York. Following the sudden death of their father, the powerful King Edward IV, the princes were placed in the royal apartments of the Tower, which at the time was not just a prison but a secure palace where monarchs traditionally resided before their coronation. Their protector was their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who had been appointed Lord Protector to guide the young king and the kingdom. But within weeks, the situation twisted into something far darker. Richard challenged the legitimacy of his own nephews, declaring them illegitimate based on a controversial claim that their parents' marriage was invalid. Parliament swiftly accepted this declaration in an act known as Titulus Regius, and the Duke of Gloucester was crowned King Richard III. The two boys, now officially bastards and barred from the throne, were moved from the royal apartments into the heart of the fortress itself. And then they simply vanished from public view. By the end of that year, they were never seen again. The question of what happened to the princes in the Tower is the ultimate cold case, a 400-year-old murder mystery where the crime is all but certain, but the perpetrator remains shrouded in doubt. The most obvious suspect, and the one traditionally vilified by history, is their uncle, King Richard III. The motive seems overwhelmingly clear. By removing the boys, he solidified his own shaky claim to the throne, eliminating the two living symbols of the previous regime who could at any moment become the focus of a rebellion to restore the rightful king. Contemporary or near-contemporary sources like the chronicler Sir Thomas More laid the blame directly at Richard's feet, writing that the king gave orders for the boys to be smothered in their beds with pillows. This narrative was powerfully cemented by William Shakespeare a century later, who painted Richard as a monstrous, scheming hunchback, a portrayal that has defined his popular image ever since. Yet, we must be cautious, as many of these accounts were written under the rule of the dynasty that defeated and succeeded Richard, giving them a powerful incentive to blacken his name. This brings us to the other prime suspect, Henry Tudor, who became King Henry VII after defeating and killing Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. Henry's claim to the throne was exceptionally weak based on a distant and contested lineage. To secure his reign, he married the prince's older sister, Elizabeth of York, thereby uniting the warring houses of Lancaster and York. But the existence of the princes, even imprisoned, posed a far greater threat to him than they did to Richard. For Richard, they were a political embarrassment. For Henry, they were rival claimants with a much stronger bloodline. If the boys were still alive when Henry took power, he would have had an equally powerful motive to quietly dispose of them. Some theories even suggest the boys were killed on the orders of Henry's powerful mother, Margaret Beaufort, to clear the path for her son. The frustrating truth is that there is no definitive contemporary evidence that conclusively proves who gave the order or when the boys died. The mystery deepened dramatically 2 centuries later, in the year 1674. Workers making repairs to a staircase within the tower made a grim discovery. A wooden chest buried beneath a pile of rubble contained the skeletons of 2 children. King Charles II, upon learning of the find, ordered an investigation. The bones were examined by the royal surgeon, who concluded they belonged to 2 children roughly the ages of the missing princes. Convinced this was them, Charles had the remains interred in a marble urn in Westminster Abbey, where they still rest today. Modern analysis has been limited, but our examination in the 1930s seemed to support the age estimates, though it could not confirm the sex or the date of death. While it is highly probable these are the bones of the princes, the fact that they were found jumbled together without any artifacts makes it impossible to be 100% certain, or to determine a cause of death from the skeletal remains alone. This unresolved tragedy resonates so powerfully because it is more than just a murder mystery. It became a foundational legend that shaped the English monarchy. The widespread belief that Richard III had killed his own nephews created a wave of disgust and opposition that contributed to his downfall, allowing Henry VII to position himself as a restorer of order. This event marked the bloody end of the Plantagenet dynasty and the rise of the Tudors, a new line of kings whose legitimacy was forever intertwined with the ghostly fate of the 2 boys. The story has been a fertile ground for speculation, inspiring societies dedicated to clearing Richard's name and countless historical novels that explore every possible angle, from escape plots to secret survivals. The fate of the princes in the tower remains locked within the stone of the Tower of London, a poignant and enduring symbol of the brutal price of power, where the most vulnerable victims were sacrificed in a shadowy Game of Thrones, and the truth was the first casualty. From the claustrophobic confines of an English fortress, we now journey to a landscape of breathtaking scale and openness, the vast, arid plains of southern Peru. Here, spread across nearly 200 square miles of the Pampas de Jumana, lies one of the world's most enigmatic artistic achievements, the Nazca Lines. The sheer immensity of these creations defies easy comprehension. Etched into the dark, sun-baked desert pavement by the simple act of removing the top layer of reddish-brown pebbles to reveal the lighter-colored earth beneath, the lines form a sprawling gallery of colossal figures. Some are clean, razor-straight lines that run for miles, converging and diverging with mathematical precision across the flat basin, seemingly undeterred by the natural rises and falls of the terrain. Others are massive geometric shapes, immense trapezoids, perfect triangles, and spiraling coils that stretch over the landscape. But the most astonishing are the biomorphs, the enormous, stylized drawings of animals and plants. A hummingbird with a beak longer than a football field, a massive spider whose form is so accurately rendered that entomologists can identify its species, a condor with wings outstretched, a monkey with an elaborately curled tail, and a strange, humanoid figure often called the astronaut, all stand as silent, monumental testaments to a culture's vision and determination. The true mystery of the Nazca Lines is a dual one, involving both their purpose and their method of construction. Created by the Nazca culture between 500 BC and 500 AD, These geoglyphs were designed on a scale so vast that their complete forms are only truly visible from the air, a perspective the creators themselves could never have physically achieved. This single fact has launched 1,000 theories, from the scholarly to the sensational. One of the earliest and most persistent theories, championed by researcher Piri Reis, who dedicated her life to their study, posits that the lines formed a massive astronomical calendar. According to this idea, the long lines pointed to celestial bodies on the horizon at key dates in the solar and lunar cycles, marking solstices and equinoxes to guide agricultural and ritual practices. While some lines do align with celestial events, many others do not, and modern statistical analysis has shown that the number of alignments is not significantly greater than what random chance would produce, casting some doubt on this as a sole explanation. A more widely accepted theory today focuses on ritual and religion. Many archaeologists now believe the lines were sacred pathways, walked upon during ceremonial processions to communicate with the gods, likely those controlling the most precious and scarce resource in the desert, water. The shapes of animals, many of which are associated with water or fertility in Andean cosmology, the spider as a bringer of rain, the hummingbird as a creature capable of reaching the heavens, support this view. The trapezoids and plazas may have served as gathering places for communities performing rituals, with the act of creating and maintaining the lines itself being a form of worship, a collective prayer etched into the very skin of the earth. The sheer scale of the work, requiring centuries of coordinated effort, suggests a powerful, unifying religious belief that could command such immense social organization. Of course, the inability to see the full picture from the ground has also fueled more exotic interpretations. Perhaps the most famous is the suggestion by Swiss author Erich von Däniken that the lines were landing strips or navigation markers for extraterrestrial spacecraft, with the astronaut figure serving as a depiction of the alien visitors. While this idea captures the public imagination, it is overwhelmingly rejected by archaeologists, not least because it dismisses the sophisticated ingenuity of the Nazca people themselves. The far greater engineering puzzle is not why they were built, but precisely how the Nazca achieved such staggering precision without the aid of flight. The answer reveals their profound skill as surveyors. They almost certainly used simple yet brilliantly effective surveying techniques. A small-scale model of a design could have been created on a portable grid and then scaled up using a series of stakes and ropes. By establishing a central axis line and using a system of proportional measurement, teams of workers could transfer the complex curves and angles of a spider or a monkey onto the desert floor with remarkable accuracy. A long, straight line could be created by simply sighting on a distant hilltop or a series of marker posts. The stable, windless climate of the Nazca Desert has acted as a perfect preservative, ensuring that these fragile drawings, scraped only inches deep into the soil, have survived for 2 millennia. The creation of the Nazca Lines was a communal, generational project, a testament to human cooperation and a deep spiritual connection to a challenging environment. They remain a powerful enigma not because they are inexplicable, but because they represent a convergence of art, astronomy, religion, and engineering on a scale that is almost difficult for the modern mind to grasp, a canvas so large that its creators could only fully appreciate their own genius through faith and collective memory. Far from the sun-scorched plains of Nazca, in the damp, wind-swept landscape of Brittany in northwestern France, lies another ancient marvel that operates on an equally epic scale, but with a completely different aesthetic. Here in the village of Carnac, you will find the single most extensive collection of megalithic standing stones anywhere on the planet. The sheer density of the site is staggering. Imagine walking through a quiet French countryside and stumbling upon a field where not one or two, but thousands of massive, weathered stones stand in eerie, silent rows stretching for miles into the distance. This is the Carnac alignments, a complex of more than 3,000 individual menhirs, the local term for these prehistoric standing stones erected during the Neolithic period, roughly between 4,500 BC and 3,300 BC. These are not arranged in circles like the more famous Stonehenge, but in long parallel lines, sometimes as many as 13 rows deep, marching across the landscape with a purposeful, almost military precision. The major groupings have names that evoke their scale and mystery. The Voynich alignments with 11 converging rows of 1,099 stones, the Camario or Place of the Dead, with 10 rows winding through a forest, and the Kaleskan, a smaller but still immense set of 13 lines ending in a stone circle. Seeing them today, meticulously preserved yet worn smooth by 5,000 years of rain and wind, is an experience that humbles the soul. You are not just looking at a monument, you are walking through a forest of granite questions, each stone a silent sentinel guarding a secret it has refused to surrender. The central, driving question is, of course, what was the purpose of this colossal undertaking? The effort required to quarry, transport, and erect so many stones, some weighing several tons, would have been immense for a Neolithic society, demanding a highly organized community and a motivation powerful enough to sustain the project over many generations. The leading theories are as varied as the stones themselves, and they reflect our attempts to get inside the minds of our distant ancestors. One of the most compelling ideas is that the alignments functioned as a gigantic astronomical observatory or calendar. Proponents of this theory point to the specific orientations of the stone rows. Many of the lines are aligned to the points on the horizon where the sun rises and sets at the solstices, the shortest and longest days of the year. Some researchers have also suggested alignments with the moon and prominent stars. In this view, the entire complex could have been a sophisticated celestial computer, a way for an early farming society to track the passing seasons with precision, knowing exactly when to plant and when to harvest, thereby tying their survival directly to their understanding of the cosmos. The stones would have served as permanent, unmovable sightlines, allowing priests or astronomers to predict celestial events that were crucial to their way of life. Another fascinating and more recent theory suggests the stones might have been part of an early seismic prediction system. The region of Brittany is crisscrossed with active geological fault lines. The proponents of this idea note that the granite stones, which contain high amounts of quartz, are piezoelectric. This means that when subjected to pressure or stress, like the immense tectonic forces that build up before an earthquake, they can generate weak electrical charges. It is theorized that the Neolithic builders, through long observation, might have noticed that the stones emitted strange lights or sparks, known as earthquake lights, or produced unsettling sensations in the days or hours before a tremor. By erecting this vast network of stones along these fault lines, they could have been creating a massive, early warning system for earthquakes, a way to monitor the invisible stresses building deep within the earth. While this theory is speculative and difficult to prove, it offers an intriguingly practical explanation for why the stones were placed with such specific geographic awareness. Perhaps the most widely accepted explanation, however, leans toward the spiritual. The alignments were almost certainly a sacred religious site of profound importance. Given the scale and permanence of the construction, it likely served as a central ceremonial ground for a widespread population, a place of pilgrimage and ritual. The orderly, processional nature of the long rows of stones strongly suggests they were designed to guide people to Koryog after their movement toward a focal point, perhaps a burial mound or a special shrine. They may have been the stage for ceremonies honoring ancestors, celebrating deities of the earth and sky, or marking rites of passage. The very act of building the alignments, a project that would have united many communities over centuries, may have been a religious act in itself, a way to bind the people to their land and their cosmology in a tangible, enduring way. Over the millennia, local folklore has woven its own stories around the stones, with one legend claiming they are a Roman legion turned to stone by the wizard Merlin, a poetic, but historically impossible, tale that speaks to the powerful impression the stones have always made on those who encountered them. The ultimate frustration of the Carnac Stones is that their true purpose has been irrevocably lost to time. The culture that built them left no written records, and their oral traditions have long since faded into silence. What remains is the physical evidence, the sheer number of stones, their deliberate arrangement, and their relationship to the landscape and the sky. Each theory, the astronomical calendar, the seismic monitor, the sacred temple, adds a layer of understanding, but none provides a definitive answer. The Carnac alignments stand as a monument to a collective human endeavor, a testament to what a society can achieve when united by a common vision, even if that vision is one we can no longer fully see. They challenge us to look beyond simple explanations and to appreciate the complexity of Neolithic minds, who transformed a rugged landscape into a lasting enigma of granite and purpose. Deep within the lush, tropical river deltas of southern Costa Rica, a discovery was made in the 1930s that seemed to defy both the jungle and logic itself. As the United Fruit Company cleared vast tracts of land for banana plantations, their bulldozers began to unearth strange, impossibly round stones, some peeking just above the soil, others buried deep beneath the roots of ancient trees. These were not natural river rocks, they were monumental, man-made spheres carved with a geometric perfection that was startling to behold. Known locally as Los Bolas, these stone spheres range in size from a few inches in diameter to truly colossal specimens over 6 feet across, weighing an astonishing 16 tons or more. The sheer number of them is staggering, with hundreds documented and many more likely still hidden in the untamed landscape. Their surfaces, crafted from a tough granodiorite rock, are often remarkably smooth, approaching a true spherical form that would be challenging to create even with modern tools. The immediate and obvious question is, who created these enigmatic objects and how did they achieve such precision? Archaeological evidence points firmly to the Dikwis culture, a pre-Columbian society that flourished in this region from around 700 AD until just before the Spanish arrival in the 16th century. The Dikwis were skilled artisans known for their intricate goldwork and sophisticated pottery, but the spheres represent their most ambitious and enduring legacy. The method of their creation is a testament to human ingenuity and patience. Researchers believe the craftsmen first identified large boulders of the desired material in the nearby Talamanca Mountains. They would then use heat building fires against the stone, and then rapidly cooling the heated surface with water, causing flakes of rock to fall off. Once a rough, rounded shape was achieved, the meticulous work began. Using smaller hammerstones made of an equally hard or harder material, they would peck and grind the surface slowly, painstakingly, over what was likely many years, removing any irregularities until the sphere achieved its stunning symmetry. The final polishing was done with sand or finer abrasives, giving the spheres their characteristically smooth finish. The real haunting mystery, however, is not how they were made, but why. What powerful impulse drove a society to invest such monumental effort into creating these perfect forms, only to then arrange them in patterns across the landscape? Some of the spheres were found placed in groups, forming straight lines, curves, or even triangular and parallelogram arrangements, often aligned with the cardinal directions. This has led to the compelling theory that they functioned as a sophisticated astronomical observatory. Certain alignments may have pointed toward the rising and setting of the sun during solstices and equinoxes, or to other significant celestial bodies, serving as a giant calendar to regulate agricultural cycles and religious ceremonies. The spheres, in this view, were anchors in a cosmic map connecting the Dikwis people to the rhythms of the universe. Another prominent theory suggests they were markers of social status and power. The largest and most perfectly formed spheres are often found near the sites of what are believed to be the dwellings of high-status individuals or chiefs. In this interpretation, the spheres were not functional tools but potent symbols. The ability to command the vast labor required to create and transport a multi-ton sphere was a clear demonstration of a leader's wealth, influence, and spiritual authority. A sphere's size and perfection would have directly reflected the power of its owner, making them territorial markers that delineated the lands of different clans or chieftains. They were statements in stone proclaiming control over both the land and the people who lived on it. There is also a fascinating, though more speculative, idea that the arrangements held a deeper spiritual meaning. The perfect sphere is a shape that appears nowhere in nature. It is a human conception of ideal form. For the Dikwis, these balls may have represented celestial bodies like the sun or the moon, or they could have symbolized the wholeness of the cosmos or the unity of the community. Their placement in specific geometric patterns might have mirrored their worldview, creating a sacred geometry on the earth that was meant to bring order and harmony to their world. The tragedy and the source of the enduring mystery is that the Spanish conquest and the diseases that followed caused the collapse of the Dikwis culture before any written record of the sphere's purpose could be made. Later, many spheres were looted from their original locations, rolled away by treasure hunters, or used as eccentric lawn ornaments, forever severing the archaeological context that might have provided clues. Today, they stand as silent, polished sentinels in town squares and museums. Their original configurations and the grand design they were part of lost to the jungle and to time. They are a powerful reminder of a sophisticated culture that sought to impose perfect order on a chaotic world, leaving behind a legacy of stone that is as beautiful as it is baffling. While our journey has taken us to massive stone spheres and sprawling desert drawings, our next mystery proves that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas can be contained within the smallest of objects. In the basement of the National Museum of Iraq in Baghdad sits a rather unassuming clay pot about the size of a large man's fist. It would be easy to walk right past it, but this simple jar, along with a handful of others like it, has ignited one of the most heated and fascinating debates in the history of archaeology. Known collectively as the Baghdad Battery, this artifact consists of three key components: the clay jar itself, a carefully rolled copper cylinder fixed inside the jar with an asphalt seal, and an iron rod suspended neatly inside that copper cylinder, also sealed in place with an asphalt stopper. When it was uncovered during excavations at Qujat Rabu, just outside Baghdad in the late 1930s, it was dated to the Parthian period, roughly 2,000 years ago, with some similar finds possibly belonging to the later Sassanid Empire. Initially, it was catalogued as a curiosity, perhaps a vessel for storing sacred scrolls. But a decade later, German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig took a much closer look at the arrangement of metals and the presence of the asphalt seal, and he proposed a theory that sent shockwaves through the academic community. He suggested that if the jar were filled with an acidic or alkaline liquid, something as common as vinegar or grape juice, the interaction between the acidic electrolyte and the two dissimilar metals, copper and iron, would have created a small electrical charge. In essence, he was looking at a primitive but functional galvanic cell, a battery created centuries before Alessandro Volta's official invention of the battery in the year 1800. The implications of this are staggering. If Koenig was correct, it means that ancient Mesopotamian craftsmen might have possessed a working knowledge of electrochemistry, a branch of science we do not believe was understood for another 1800 years. What could they possibly have used such a tiny electrical current for? The most compelling proposed application is electroplating. This is the process of using electricity to bond a thin layer of a precious metal, like gold, onto the surface of a less valuable metal, like silver or copper. We know for a fact that the Parthians and Sassanids were master goldsmiths, creating intricate objects that appear to be gold-plated. Conventional archaeology explains this through mercury gilding, a dangerous but effective technique. However, proponents of the battery theory argue that a weak electrical current could have achieved a similar, and perhaps even more controlled, result. An experimental archaeologist in the 1940s, Willard Gray, actually built a replica of the Baghdad jar, filled it with grape juice, and confirmed that it could indeed produce a low-voltage current, somewhere between 0.8 and 2 volts. While this is not enough to light a bulb or power any significant device, it is perfectly sufficient for the subtle process of electroplating a small object like a ring or a statue. This idea suggests a hidden chapter in the history of technology, where ancient artisans might have been able to perform a kind of chemical magic, transferring the shimmer of gold onto base metals through a force they may not have fully understood but could clearly harness. However, the majority of mainstream archaeologists remain deeply skeptical, and they present a strong counter-argument. The most widely accepted alternative theory is that these jars were simply secure storage containers for precious papyrus or parchment scrolls. The iron rod, in this view, was simply a spindle around which the scroll was wrapped, and the copper cylinder was a protective case. The asphalt seal would have served to keep the contents dry and safe from insects and decay in the humid Mesopotamian climate. This explanation is perfectly logical and fits neatly with what we know about ancient storage practices. The skeptics point out that no wires or conductors have ever been found with these jars, nor have any electroplated objects from the period been definitively proven to have been plated using electricity rather than mercury gilding. Furthermore, if these were truly batteries, why have we not found more of them, or any contemporary drawings or texts that describe their use? The silence of the historical record, they argue, speaks volumes. The debate ultimately forces us to confront the limits of our interpretation. Is the battery theory a case of seeing modern knowledge in an ancient object, a form of projection where we want to find our own technological reflection in the past? Or is it a genuine glimpse of a lost scientific principle, a spark of knowledge that was discovered, used for a specific purpose, and then forgotten, perhaps because the craftsmen who held the knowledge never wrote it down, or because those records were lost to the ravages of time? The truth is, we may never know for certain. The Baghdad Battery exists in a tantalizing gray area, a physical object whose true purpose remains just out of reach. It serves as a powerful symbol of how much we still have to learn about the ingenuity of ancient cultures, reminding us that the past may hold secrets not just of kings and conquests, but of quiet, experimental genius that flickered briefly in a clay pot, waiting 2 millennia for someone to notice. Leaving behind the speculative electricity of the Baghdad Battery, we arrive at a mystery that is tantalizingly material, a treasure map etched not in fragile papyrus, but in the enduring heavy metal of copper. Among the famous Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in the Qumran Caves, a collection of ancient Jewish texts mostly written on parchment or papyrus, one scroll stands utterly apart. Designated as 3Q15, it is famously known as the Copper Scroll, and it is unlike any other religious manuscript found in the desert. Dating to the 1st century AD, this scroll is exactly what its name implies, 2 rolls of pure, oxidized copper sheet, so brittle from centuries of corrosion that scholars faced an immense challenge just to open it. They couldn't simply unroll it. Instead, they had to carefully cut it into 23 separate curved segments, like slicing a fragile, ancient cigar, to finally reveal the text stamped into its metal surface. And that text is what has fueled dreams and expeditions for decades. It is not a spiritual treatise, a psalm, or a biblical commentary. It is an inventory, a straightforward list of 64 locations where staggering quantities of treasure are supposedly hidden. The sums described are almost fantastical, enough to destabilize the economy of the ancient world. Vast quantities of gold and silver, described with specific weights in talents, a unit that could be anywhere from 75 to 130 pounds. When you add it all up, the scroll claims to document a hidden fortune of hundreds of tons of precious metals, along with precious priestly vestments and other valuable items. The immediate, heart-pounding question is, was this a literal, factual record of a real treasure, or was it something else entirely? This is the core of the Copper Scroll's enduring puzzle. The debate among scholars is deeply divided and hinges on the scroll's unique nature. If it is a factual record, whose treasure was it and why was it hidden? The most popular theory points to the vast wealth of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. Historical sources describe the temple as being unimaginably rich, filled with centuries of donations and spoils. When the First Jewish-Roman War broke out in 66 AD, culminating in the sack of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, it is entirely plausible that priests or rebels smuggled this immense treasure out of the city to prevent it from falling into Roman hands. They would have chosen copper for the record precisely because of its durability. This was not a document meant for daily study, but a permanent, indestructible ledger meant to survive the ages until the treasure could be safely recovered. The instructions in the scroll are incredibly specific, yet frustratingly cryptic. They read like a series of riddles directing the reader to locations such as, in the ruin that is in the valley, pass under the steps leading to the east. Or, in the cavity of the old house of tribute in the platform of the chain circle. These descriptions rely on landmarks and place names that would have been familiar 2,000 years ago but are utterly meaningless today. The landscape has changed, names have been forgotten, and generations of wars and construction have erased the very signposts the scroll depends on. This lends a powerful air of authenticity to the document. A forger would likely have made the directions clearer to make their hoax more believable. However, a significant number of experts argue passionately for a symbolic interpretation. They suggest that the treasure listed is not real gold and silver, but a metaphorical representation of sacred, spiritual wealth. The immense, almost exaggerated quantities could be a literary device, and the hiding places might refer to aspects of Jewish law, theology, or the layout of the temple itself. In this view, the Copper Scroll is not a map to physical riches, but a religious text, perhaps a record of esoteric knowledge or a symbolic description of the lost treasures of the temple, written down as an act of mourning and remembrance after its destruction. The use of copper in this scenario was simply to ensure this important religious document would last, just as the community hoped their faith would endure. This theory explains why no single massive hoard has ever been found that matches the scroll's descriptions. The treasure was never meant to be dug up with shovels. Regardless of its true nature, the scroll's siren call has proven irresistible to treasure hunters. For over half a century, well-funded expeditions have used the most advanced technology available, from ground-penetrating radar to satellite imagery, and have scoured the Judean desert and the areas around Qumran and Jerusalem, trying to match the scroll's cryptic clues to the actual topography. They have dug in caves, under ruins, and near ancient aqueducts. While these searches have occasionally turned up small, fascinating artifacts from the period, a few Roman coins, pottery shards, or remnants of ancient habitation, none have yielded even a fraction of the immense treasure described. This string of failures leads to three equally plausible and equally frustrating conclusions. First, perhaps the symbolic interpretation is correct and the searchers are fundamentally misguided, chasing a phantom. Second, maybe the treasure was indeed real, but it was discovered and looted long ago, perhaps by the Romans who captured and tortured prisoners who might have known the secret, or by Bedouin tribes or medieval travelers who stumbled upon the caches by pure luck, leaving the Copper Scroll as a ghost of a fortune that has already been spent. The third and most tantalizing possibility is that the treasure remains exactly where it was hidden, waiting for someone to finally crack the code, to look in the one place no one has thought to search, to understand a forgotten place name or recognize a geological feature that has been misidentified for generations. The Copper Scroll is a unique paradox, an object of immense tangible physicality that points to a secret which may be entirely conceptual. It forces us to grapple with the very nature of value, challenging us to decide what constitutes a true treasure. Is it the cold weight of gold and silver, or is it the enduring power of a mystery that continues to captivate the world? And now we arrive at what is perhaps the most famous and enduring legend of them all, a story that has transcended its ancient origins to become a permanent fixture of our collective imagination, the lost city of Atlantis. The entire saga begins not with an archaeologist's shovel, but with the pen of the Greek philosopher Plato over 2,300 years ago. He introduces Atlantis in two of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, presented not as a myth, but as a true historical account passed down through generations. According to Plato, Atlantis was a formidable naval power located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which we know today as the Strait of Gibraltar, placing it out in the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. He describes a utopian island kingdom of immense wealth and sophistication, with concentric rings of water and land, a magnificent royal palace, and a temple dedicated to the god Poseidon, plated in shimmering gold and silver. The Atlanteans were a people of great intellect and military might, who initially lived in a state of virtue but gradually became corrupted by pride and greed. As punishment for their moral decay, Plato writes, the gods sent violent earthquakes and floods in a single day and night of misfortune, causing the entire island to be swallowed up by the sea and vanished. This dramatic and moralistic ending is the catalyst for one of history's greatest treasure hunts. The fascinating tension at the heart of the Atlantis mystery is that Plato, a philosopher, uses the story primarily as a political allegory. He crafts Atlantis as a rival to his ideal state, Athens, using its spectacular rise and catastrophic fall to illustrate the dangers of imperial ambition and spiritual decay. For him, it was a powerful what-if scenario, a cautionary tale. Yet he frames it with such specific, tangible detail describing the island's geography, its architecture, and even the dimensions of its central plain, that for centuries readers have wondered if he was weaving his philosophical lesson around a kernel of genuine historical truth, a real catastrophe that was distorted and magnified by time. This question has launched 1,000 theories and expeditions, with scholars and enthusiasts proposing real-world locations for Atlantis that span the entire globe. One of the most compelling and scientifically supported candidates lies not in the Atlantic but in the Aegean Sea, the volcanic island of Santorini. Around the year 1600 BC, this island, then known as Thera, was home to the sophisticated Minoan civilization. It was a thriving hub of trade and culture with advanced plumbing and multi-story buildings. Then, one of the most catastrophic volcanic eruptions in human history tore the island apart. The center of Thera collapsed into the sea, forming a massive caldera, while tsunamis estimated to be over 100 feet high radiated outwards, slamming into the coast of Crete, 70 miles away, and effectively decimating the Minoan Empire. The parallels to Plato's story are striking. An advanced island civilization virtually overnight, brought to a sudden and violent end by a geological cataclysm that caused parts of the island to sink beneath the waves. Proponents of this theory suggest that the story of this disaster could have been passed down through Egyptian traders to the Greeks, eventually reaching Plato's ears and being adapted into his grand allegory. A more recent and visually stunning candidate has emerged in the African nation of Mauritania, known as the Richat structure or the Eye of the Sahara. From space, this geological formation is a mesmerizing, nearly perfect series of concentric rings, bearing an uncanny resemblance to Plato's description of Atlantis' city layout. Located inland, it now sits in the midst of a barren desert. However, geological evidence suggests that in the distant past, this area was fertile and contained a massive lake or even an inland sea. Could the Richat structure be the remains of the capital city of Atlantis, now desiccated and eroded by millennia of wind? Those who support this theory argue that Plato's description of a city built on a plain, surrounded by mountains and accessible from the sea via a great canal, fits the topography of the Richat remarkably well. They propose that the sinking of Atlantis was not a literal submersion, but a metaphorical one, representing the city's abandonment and burial by sand after a dramatic climate shift turned a lush green land into an unforgiving desert. This interpretation requires a radical rethinking of the timeline and location provided by Plato, but it demonstrates the incredible flexibility of the legend. Other proposed locations are as diverse as the imaginations of those who search for them. Some have looked to the Azores Islands in the mid-Atlantic, searching for evidence of a sunken landmass. Others point to the marshes of southern Spain near the city of Cadiz, where archaeologists have found remains of an ancient, wealthy city that was destroyed by a tsunami. There are even theories that place Atlantis in the Caribbean, the North Sea, or Antarctica. The very fact that so many different cultures and regions can lay a plausible claim to being the inspiration for Atlantis speaks to the power of the story. It taps into a universal human fascination with a golden age, a fallen paradise, and the terrifying power of nature to erase even the greatest of civilizations. The search for Atlantis is about more than just finding ruins. It is a quest for our own origins, a desire to confirm that there were advanced societies before our own, whose knowledge was lost in a single catastrophic event. It fuels speculation about prehistoric technologies and forgotten wisdom, making it the ultimate archaeological mystery, not because the evidence is clear, but because the possibility is so endlessly alluring. Whether Atlantis was a philosophical fiction, a distorted memory of the Thera eruption, or a city waiting to be discovered under the sands of the Sahara, its legend endures as a powerful symbol of human ambition, fragility, and our eternal hope that the greatest secrets of the past are still out there, waiting to be found. But our journey through the ancient world would be incomplete without confronting a legend so grand that its very reality is now in question. We arrive at the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, a name that conjures images of lush, terraced vegetation towering over the dusty Mesopotamian plain, an oasis of green sustained by miraculous engineering. Described by ancient historians like Diodorus Siculus and Strabo, it was said to have been built by the great King Nebuchadnezzar II in the 6th century BC as a gift for his homesick wife, Amytis, who longed for the green mountains of her homeland. They wrote of ascending terraces supported by vast stone arches, filled with every kind of tree and flower, and irrigated by complex machinery that lifted water from the Euphrates River to the highest levels, creating a stunning artificial mountain of gardens. It was listed among the original 7 wonders of the ancient world, a testament to human ingenuity and royal devotion. Yet here lies the profound and unsettling mystery. Despite its fame, not a single shred of definitive archaeological evidence for the Hanging Gardens has ever been found in Babylon itself. This absence is glaring. Modern excavations at the site of Babylon, near modern-day Al-Hilla in Iraq, have revealed the foundations of Nebuchadnezzar's vast palace, the impressive Ishtar Gate, and the thick city walls he boasted of in his own inscriptions. But there is no trace of the massive stone foundations, the raised terraces, or the sophisticated water-lifting systems that such a structure would have required. Even more damning is the silence from the very people who should have been its greatest champions. The Babylonian priests and scribes who kept meticulous records of Nebuchadnezzar's building projects never once mentioned the creation of these legendary gardens. This has led a growing number of scholars to embrace a radical theory that the Hanging Gardens were not a physical place at all, but an elaborate and beautiful fiction. They argue that the gardens were a literary invention, a romantic ideal of Eastern splendor imagined by Greek writers centuries after Nebuchadnezzar's reign, a story that grew in the telling until it was accepted as historical fact. In this view, the gardens represent a wonder of the ear, not the eye, a powerful piece of propaganda that painted Babylon as a city of impossible marvels. However, another compelling theory has emerged, one that doesn't dismiss the gardens as fiction but simply relocates them. The leading proponent of this idea is Dr. Stephanie Dalley, an Oxford Assyriologist who has spent decades piecing together a different narrative. Her research suggests that the classical authors who describe the gardens got the location wrong. She argues that the Hanging Gardens were not in Babylon at all, but were actually built over a century earlier in the Assyrian capital of Nineveh by the great King Sennacherib. The evidence she presents is remarkably persuasive. Sennacherib's own palace inscriptions carved into stone boast of a wonder for all peoples, a fantastical garden he created, complete with exotic plants and a revolutionary water-raising system. He describes a massive, finely engineered bronze water-raising screw, an Archimedes screw long before Archimedes, that was part of a complex network of canals, dams, and aqueducts he built to bring water from mountain sources over 30 miles away to the citadel of Nineveh. This system, a genuine marvel of engineering, could have easily sustained the kind of terraced gardens the Greeks later wrote about. Furthermore, a contemporary bas-relief from Sennacherib's palace appears to depict a lush garden growing on a terraced structure with arched supports, directly overlooking a watercourse, a visual match for the later descriptions. Dr. Dalley's theory posits that when the Assyrian Empire fell, the magnificent gardens of Nineveh were misattributed by later Greek historians to the more famous city of Babylon, and to its most famous builder, Nebuchadnezzar, conflating two great Mesopotamian kingdoms into one. Of course, a third possibility remains, one that appeals to the romantic and the patient, that the gardens did exist in Babylon, but their remains have been completely lost to time. The gardens, if they were real, would have been an organic structure dependent on a constant supply of water. Once the complex irrigation system failed, whether through neglect, war, or a shift in the Euphrates River's course, the plants would have withered and died in a matter of years. The mud brick, so common in Babylonian construction, even if faced with stone, could have been quarried for other buildings or simply eroded back into the earth, leaving no distinct footprint for archaeologists to find millennia later. Perhaps the gardens were built on the banks of the Euphrates, and their entire foundation has since been washed away or buried under deep layers of silt, hiding them forever from our view. The mystery of the Hanging Gardens forces us to confront the very nature of historical knowledge. Do we trust the vivid accounts of classical authors or the silent testimony of the earth? Is it possible that one of our most cherished wonders was a case of mistaken identity, its glory belonging to a different king in a different city? Or does its absence make it an even more powerful symbol, a dream of a perfect, impossible garden, a testament not to what was built, but to what humanity has always aspired to create, a vision of harmony between nature and engineering so powerful that it has refused to fade from our imagination, even in the face of contradictory evidence? Leaving behind the legendary gardens of Babylon, we venture inside a dark Egyptian temple, where a single, strange carving on a stone wall has sparked a debate that bridges the gap between ancient symbolism and science fiction. Deep within the crypts of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, a site dedicated to the goddess of love, joy, and motherhood, there is a series of intricate bas-reliefs that tell the story of Egyptian cosmology. But one particular image stands out, so unusual that it has become the centerpiece of a radical theory. The carving shows two figures holding up a giant, tear-shaped object. Inside this bulb is a snake, its body stretched out in a long, wavy line, extending from a cord-like base that seems to connect to a box upon which a kneeling god rests his hands. To the modern eye, the resemblance is startling. It looks almost exactly like an oversized, archaic version of a light bulb, with the snake representing the glowing filament, the bulb itself being the glass enclosure, and the base and box forming a primitive power source. This interpretation, known as the Dendera light theory, suggests that the ancient Egyptians might have possessed, or at least understood, the principles of electric lighting. Proponents of this idea point to several compelling details. They argue that the object depicted is utterly unique and doesn't neatly match other known Egyptian symbols. They question why such a scene would be carved in a dark, subterranean crypt, a place where traditional torch or oil lamp light would have been impractical due to smoke and oxygen consumption. Could this, they ask, be a secret record of advanced technology, knowledge that was lost for millennia? They draw connections to other archaeological curiosities, like the absence of soot marks in some deep tombs and temples, and even reference the earlier mentioned Baghdad Battery, proposing that such a device could have provided the power for this hypothetical ancient lamp. This theory paints a picture of an Egypt far more technologically sophisticated than we ever imagined, a civilization that harnessed invisible forces to banish the darkness. However, the overwhelming consensus among Egyptologists and mainstream historians offers a very different and symbolically rich explanation. They identify the scene not as a technical diagram, but as a profound religious myth. The bulb is not a glass enclosure at all. It is a giant lotus flower, a plant of immense symbolic importance in Egyptian mythology, representing creation, rebirth, and the sun itself. The snake emerging from it is not a filament but a representation of the god Harsomptes, a manifestation of the sun god, often depicted as a serpent. In this specific context, the scene illustrates the moment of cosmic creation. The lotus flower was believed to be the first thing to emerge from the primordial waters at the dawn of time, and from it the sun god was born, rising to bring light to the world. The entire tableau is a snapshot of this divine birth. The cord is the snake's own body, and the power box is a jed pillar, a powerful symbol of stability and the backbone of the god Osiris. The kneeling god is Her, the deity of infinity, holding not a socket but the lotus stem itself, supporting this moment of Genesis. In this view, the image has nothing to do with electricity and everything to do with the Egyptians' sophisticated understanding of their own cosmology, a story carved in stone to ensure the daily rebirth of the sun and the continuance of the cosmos. So why does this light bulb interpretation persist with such vigor? The appeal is deeply rooted in our modern worldview. We live in an age defined by technology, so it is natural for us to look at the past and interpret ambiguous images through a technological lens. The resemblance is undeniably striking to a contemporary observer, and the idea of a lost, advanced civilization taps into a powerful sense of mystery and wonder. It suggests that history is not a simple, linear progression, but that knowledge can be lost and rediscovered, a concept that is both thrilling and humbling. Furthermore, it provides a seemingly simple solution to a practical problem. How did they light their underground chambers? The mainstream answer to that is actually quite straightforward and supported by evidence. Archaeologists have found countless examples of simple stone lamps, shallow dishes filled with oil, and with a wick that would have provided ample, smokeless light for the artists and priests. Experimentation has shown that a series of such lamps, especially when their light is reflected by the highly polished limestone walls, can illuminate even the deepest chambers effectively. Soot has been found in some areas, and the lack of it in others can be explained by ventilation or subsequent cleaning. The debate over the Dendera light is a fascinating case study in how we interpret the past. It pits a literal, technological reading against a symbolic, mythological one. One perspective sees a blueprint for a device, while the other sees a prayer for creation. The mainstream interpretation is backed by the consistent context of Egyptian art and religion, where the same symbols appear again and again with well-understood meanings. The fringe theory, while captivating, requires us to believe that a single, anomalous image represents a technology that appears nowhere else in the vast corpus of Egyptian art, texts, or archaeological finds. The dendera carving does not offer proof of ancient electricity, but it does provide something equally valuable, a profound insight into the human imagination, both of the ancient Egyptians who carved their cosmic beliefs into stone and of our own as we project our technological dreams onto their silent, enigmatic world. Yet another cartographic puzzle emerges from the dusty archives of the Ottoman Empire, one that seems to defy the very timeline of human exploration. In the year 1929, while cataloguing artifacts in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace Library, a German theologian named Gustav Adolf Diesmann made a breathtaking discovery. He stumbled upon a gazelle skin parchment, a world map drawn and signed in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis. The map itself was only a fragment showing the Atlantic Ocean and the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and the Americas. It was a remarkable document in its own right, but what sent shockwaves through the world of historical research was the depiction of a landmass at the very bottom of the map, a landmass that appeared to show the northern coastline of Antarctica, a continent that would not be officially discovered for another 300 years. Even more astonishingly, this coastline was drawn without its massive, mile-thick ice cap, a condition that geological evidence tells us last existed millions of years ago. This single fragment of parchment has since become a battleground of interpretation, pitting those who see it as evidence of a prehistoric, advanced civilization against scholars who argue for a more conventional, though no less fascinating, explanation. The map's creator, Piri Reis, was no ordinary chart maker. He was a seasoned sailor, a veteran of naval battles, and crucially, an avid collector of source maps. In his own extensive notes written directly on the map, he is remarkably candid about his sources. He explicitly states that he compiled his world map using about 20 different source charts and mappi mundi, including one that he describes as being drawn by a Genos navigator from the time of Alexander the Great, and most intriguingly several maps that he attributes to Christopher Columbus. This last point is critical, as Columbus had only returned from his first voyage 2 decades earlier. Piri Reis claims to have obtained a now-lost Columbus map of the Caribbean and the American coast, which he incorporated into his own work. This admission provides a direct link to the cutting-edge, if sometimes confused, geographical knowledge of the early 16th century. For proponents of the anomalous theory, however, the true secret lies not in the Columbus maps, but in those much older sources Piri Reis mentions. They argue that one of these ancient charts must have preserved the geographical knowledge of a highly advanced prehistoric seafaring civilization, one that mapped the world, including an ice-free Antarctica, thousands of years before the rise of Egypt or Sumer. They point to the accuracy with which the map depicts the subglacial topography of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica, a coastline we have only been able to map in detail since the 1950s using modern seismic and radar technology. To them, the Piri Reis map is not an Ottoman original, but a medieval copy of a map from a lost golden age, a single, miraculous survivor from a forgotten era of exploration. Mainstream cartographic historians and geologists, however, offer a detailed and compelling counter-argument that challenges this interpretation at every turn. Their first and most significant point is one of simple misidentification. They propose that the mysterious southern landmass on the Piri Reis map is not Antarctica at all, but a speculative, composite coastline representing the southern parts of South America, perhaps blended with legendary or rumored lands. Early explorers were famously prone to filling in blank spaces on their maps with guesswork and hearsay. The eastern coast of South America, particularly the region of Brazil, curves sharply eastward on the Piri Reis map. If you continue this coastline downward, it creates a landmass that extends across the bottom of the page, which could easily be misinterpreted as a separate continent. This hypothetical terra australis was a common feature on many maps of the period, a theoretical great southern land that geographers believed must exist to balance the landmasses of the northern hemisphere. Furthermore, these scholars highlight the numerous and serious errors on the map that argue against it being derived from a hyper-accurate ancient source. The Caribbean islands are distorted, the distances across the Atlantic are inaccurate, and the map completely omits the entire Pacific Ocean, which the Spanish had already begun to explore by 1513. If Piri Reis truly had access to a map showing the precise, ice-free coastline of Antarctica, it is extraordinarily unlikely that it would have contained such glaring mistakes about the rest of the world. The second major flaw in the ancient civilization theory lies in the geological timeline. For Antarctica to have been ice-free and its coastline accurately mapped by humans, two conditions would need to be true. Humans would have had to exist with the capability for transoceanic navigation, and the continent would have had to be in a warm period. The last time the Queen Maud Land coastline was entirely free of ice was during the Oligocene epoch, more than 25 million years ago, a time long before the emergence of any hominid, let alone a sophisticated maritime culture. The most recent period when any significant portion of the Antarctic coast could have been seasonally ice-free was several million years ago, still far too early for any human presence. This geological reality presents an insurmountable problem for the lost civilization hypothesis. There is simply no point in the entire history of human evolution where people could have observed and charted an ice-free Antarctica. So, if the southern landmass isn't Antarctica, and it isn't derived from a prehistoric map, what is it? The most logical explanation is that it represents the imperfect and conflated knowledge of the New World in the immediate decades after Columbus. Piri Reis was a synthesizer, not an explorer. He took the best available sources, Portuguese charts of Africa, Spanish maps of the Caribbean, and possibly Arab maps of Asia, and combined them into a single image. The southern land is likely a combination of the newly discovered coast of Brazil, reports of Tierra del Fuego from voyages like that of Amerigo Vespucci, and the long-standing cartographic tradition of a great southern continent. The map is not a perfect record, but a magnificent snapshot of a world in transition, where hard-won empirical data collided with classical mythology and hopeful speculation. It is a testament to the intellectual ferment of the age, a time when the world was literally being redrawn piece by piece, and sometimes the cartographers had to fill in the gaps with their best guess. The enduring power of the Piri Reis map lies not in what it proves about a lost civilization, but in what it reveals about the human desire to make sense of the unknown, and how easily we can project our own modern mysteries onto the ambiguous shadows of the past. High in the Andes, overlooking the ancient Inca capital of Cusco, stands a fortress that defies both time and conventional understanding. This is Sacsayhuaman, a sprawling complex of ramps, temples, and towers, but its most iconic and baffling feature is its monumental zig-zagging walls. Constructed from enormous limestone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons and standing more than 20 feet tall, these walls are not merely large, they are a masterpiece of stonework that continues to mystify engineers and archaeologists. The sheer scale is staggering, but the true marvel lies in the details of their assembly. Each of these gigantic stones is a unique, irregular polygon, yet they are cut and fitted together with such mind-bending precision that the joints between them are virtually seamless. It's often said and demonstrated that you cannot slide a razor blade or even a single piece of paper between these massive blocks. They interlock in a complex three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, a feat of engineering that has withstood centuries of powerful Andean earthquakes, which have toppled later Spanish colonial structures built right alongside them. This incredible resilience is a direct result of the design. The irregular locking joints and the slight inward incline of the walls allow the entire structure to sway and settle during a tremor without collapsing, a sophisticated understanding of seismic activity that seems almost prescient. The central mystery of Sacsayhuaman is not just what was achieved, but how it was done by a culture that, according to our current understanding, lacked several technologies considered fundamental to such a project. The Inca had no knowledge of the wheel for transportation, no iron or steel tools to cut and shape the rock, and no draft animals stronger than the llama, which is incapable of carrying such loads. So how did they quarry, move, and position these behemoths? The process likely began at the quarries, where workers would have used harder stones as hammers to pound along natural fracture lines in the limestone, gradually splitting the blocks free. But the transportation is where the mystery truly deepens. The generally accepted theory is that they used a combination of earthen ramps, log rollers, and vast amounts of human labor, with hundreds of men pulling on thick ropes to inch the stones along the mountainous terrain. This would have been a monumental logistical effort requiring the coordination of thousands of workers, an organizational feat that the Inca Empire, with its system of compulsory public service known as mita, was uniquely positioned to accomplish. However, the most perplexing step is the final fitting. How did they achieve those perfect, airtight joints? One leading theory suggests a process of trial and error. A block would be roughly shaped at the quarry, moved to the wall, and then placed next to its neighbor. Stonemasons would then identify the high spots on the new block, mark them, and painstakingly pound the rock away with stone hammers, lower it, check the fit, and repeat the process over and over again until the contact was perfect. This method, while incredibly laborious and time-consuming, is plausible and has been demonstrated experimentally. Yet another fascinating theory, supported by local oral tradition, proposes that the Inca possessed a lost technique for softening stone. Some legends speak of a plant-based liquid that could temporarily make the surface of the rock pliable, almost like clay, allowing workers to mold the blocks together. While this may sound like fantasy, some modern experiments with acidic plant saps found in the region have shown they can indeed etch and soften certain types of stone, lending a sliver of credibility to this ancient story. The purpose of Sacsayhuaman adds another layer to its mystery. The Spanish conquistadors who first documented it labeled it a fortress, and its formidable, zigzagging walls certainly fit that description, creating kill zones where attackers could be trapped and fired upon from above. Yet, its location on a sacred hill overlooking the city, and its alignment with celestial events, strongly suggests it also served as a major religious and ceremonial center. The name Sacsayhuaman itself is often translated from Quechua as satisfied falcon, but its meaning is debated. The layout of the walls, with their three distinct tiers, may have represented the Inca worldview of the three realms: the underworld, the earthly world, and the heavenly world. The zigzag pattern itself could be a stylized representation of lightning, a powerful force associated with the god Ilapa, or the teeth of the puma, whose outline the city of Cusco was said to be designed in, with Sacsayhuaman forming the head. This blend of military, religious, and astronomical function makes it a quintessentially Inca site, a place where the practical and the spiritual were seamlessly fused into stone. The enduring enigma of Sacsayhuaman is not simply a question of technique, but of the sheer will and collective intelligence it represents. It stands as the ultimate testament to the Incas' profound connection to their environment, their mastery of stone, and their ability to organize a society to achieve the seemingly impossible, creating a legacy in rock that continues to challenge our assumptions about what ancient peoples were capable of accomplishing. In the summer of 1992, in the Chinese province of Zhejiang, a local farmer decided to pump the water out of a small, seemingly insignificant pond in his village of Longyou. Such ponds were common and were generally believed to be nothing more than deep, natural pools. But as the water level dropped over 17 continuous days of pumping, an astonishing sight was revealed. This was not a pond at all, but the flooded entrance to a colossal hand-carved cavern. When villagers mustered the courage to venture inside, they found themselves standing in a vast underground hall of staggering proportions. This single discovery prompted the draining of 24 other local ponds, and every single one revealed another massive, artificial cave. Today, these are known as the Longyou Caves, a subterranean complex that defies both logic and historical record. What they found inside was a sight to humble any observer. Each of the 25 caves is enormous, some reaching heights of 100 feet and covering areas of over 10,000 square feet, the size of a modern aircraft hangar. The total excavated rock is estimated to be nearly 1 million cubic meters, a volume that, if placed in dump trucks, would form a line stretching for over 600 miles. But the sheer scale is only the beginning of the mystery. Every surface, the walls, the high ceilings, and the massive supporting pillars, is covered in a uniform, parallel chisel mark pattern, a series of carefully angled lines that run across the stone in a stunningly consistent and decorative fashion. This is not the rough-hewn work of laborers in a hurry. It is a deliberate aesthetic choice, a signature of its creators that covers every inch of the complex. The engineering is equally sophisticated. The caves are not simple holes in the ground. Their shapes are consistent, with steep, vertical walls that slope inward slightly as they rise to meet the ceiling. The chambers are connected, and massive, load-bearing pillars were left in place by the original excavators to support the immense weight of the stone above. The angles of the walls and pillars are precise, and the builders demonstrated a profound understanding of structural mechanics, ensuring the caves have remained stable for millennia despite the region being prone to earthquakes. The enigma of the Longyou Caves is multifaceted, but it centers on three profound questions: who built them, why did they build them, and how has such a monumental project been completely erased from history? Radiocarbon dating of sediments suggests the caves were constructed well over 2,000 years ago, likely during the Western Han Dynasty, around 200 years before the Common Era. The amount of labor involved is almost incomprehensible. To remove that much rock using only hand tools like chisels and hammers would have required a workforce of thousands, toiling around the clock for decades, if not generations. This was not a clandestine, backdoor operation. It was one of the most ambitious construction projects of the ancient world. Yet, there is not a single character of text, not one line in any official dynastic history, not a single local legend or folktale that so much as hints at the existence of these caves or the colossal effort required to create them. For a civilization known for its meticulous record-keeping, this total silence is as baffling as the caves themselves. It is as if a project equivalent to the Hoover Dam was completed, and then every record of it was systematically purged from human memory. This leads us to the great unknown, the purpose. Why would a society invest such staggering resources into carving out these vast underground spaces? The leading theories are as varied as they are intriguing. One possibility is that they served as a massive imperial quarry. The sandstone extracted could have been used to build nearby cities. However, this theory fails to explain the careful, decorative finishing on every surface. Why would quarry workers spend an incalculable amount of extra time and effort to create beautiful, uniform patterns on the walls and ceilings of a mine? A quarry is a utilitarian space. The Longyou Caves feel like a finished product, a grand architectural statement. Another prominent theory posits that they were a secret imperial tomb complex or a sacred ceremonial space. The grand scale and the effort involved would be fitting for an emperor's final resting place, a hidden necropolis meant to house his spirit for eternity. The absence of records could then be explained as a security measure to prevent tomb robbers from finding the site. Yet no tombs, no burial artifacts, no inscriptions, and no human remains have ever been found inside. The caves were completely empty when discovered, swept clean of any clues that could point to their original use. A third, more speculative idea connects them to the ancient Taoist pursuit of harmony between heaven and earth. Perhaps they were intended as a physical manifestation of the underworld, a place for meditation and spiritual rituals on a scale meant to imitate the cosmos. The precise angles, the echoing spaces, and the sheer otherworldliness of being inside such a man-made cavern could have been designed to induce a specific state of mind in those who entered. Without any written record, we are left to read the language of the stone itself, a language of immense effort and purpose whose meaning has been lost to the centuries. The Longyou Caves stand as a monument to a forgotten imperative, a project so important that it commanded the labor of generations, yet so secret that its very existence was buried not under earth, but under a blanket of perfect silence. Now, let us journey from the silent, echoing halls of the Longyou Caves to the silent, wind-scoured sands of one of the most forbidding places on earth, the Taklamakan Desert in western China. Here, in this vast, arid sea of shifting dunes, a discovery was made that would shatter long-held assumptions about ancient history and human migration. Beginning in the early 20th century and accelerating with archaeological work in the 1980s and 90s, researchers began unearthing bodies from the parched, salty soil. These were not mere skeletons, but mummies preserved with an almost haunting perfection by the dry, sterile desert air. Their skin was still supple, their facial hair and eyelashes intact, and they were dressed in beautifully woven woolen textiles, plaid trousers, and felt hats. But the feature that sent the greatest shockwave through the academic world was their appearance. These individuals, dating back as far as 4,000 years, had strikingly Caucasian features, light hair, long noses, and round eyes. They were unmistakably Westerners found in the heart of what is now the Xinjiang region of China, millennia before the Silk Road was thought to have connected east and west. The existence of the Tarim mummies, named for the Tarim basin where they were found, presents a profound historical puzzle. The conventional narrative of ancient Eurasian history described a clear divide between the Western and Eastern worlds, with meaningful contact only beginning with the established Silk Road around the 2nd century BC. These mummies, however, tell a different story, one of a much earlier and more complex migration. How did these people of European descent come to be living so far east, and what kind of society did they build? The evidence points to a sophisticated and enigmatic culture. The most famous of the mummies is the so-called Beauty of Lulan, a woman who died around 1800 BC, her face still bearing a serene, noble expression. Another is the Chechen man, a tall individual with a long reddish-brown mustache and beard, buried in bright red garments. Buried with them were items that spoke of a pastoral, yet refined, way of life. Baskets of grain, bundles of ephedra, a medicinal herb, and simple wooden tools. Their textiles are particularly telling, displaying weaving techniques and tartan patterns that are remarkably similar to those found in Europe from the same period, suggesting a shared technological heritage or even a distant common origin. The central mystery revolves around their origins and language. Who exactly were these people? Genetic analysis has provided some of the most crucial clues, revealing that the mummies are primarily descended from an ancient North Eurasian population, with strong genetic links to early Bronze Age herders from the steppes of Western Russia, such as the Afanasivo culture. This suggests a massive, early migration eastward across the vast Eurasian steppe, a journey of thousands of miles that brought these nomadic peoples to the fertile river valleys that once fed into the Taklamakan Desert, which was then a more hospitable landscape. They likely spoke a language from the Tocharian branch of the Indo-European language family, a hypothesis supported by later manuscripts found in the region. The Tocharian languages are a fascinating linguistic isolate, a distant cousin to Celtic, Latin, and Greek, yet spoken in the far western reaches of China. This linguistic evidence solidifies the picture of a truly ancient eastward expansion of Indo-European peoples, a branch that became isolated and developed its own unique identity for centuries. But why did they come here to such a remote and challenging environment? The answer likely lies in the same impulses that have driven human movement for millennia, the search for new pastures and trade routes. These early settlers were not lost. They were pioneers, establishing oasis communities along the rivers that flowed down from the surrounding mountains. They raised cattle, sheep, and goats and grew wheat and millet, creating a sustainable life in the desert's periphery. Their location was not an accident. It placed them at a future crossroads of continents, suggesting they may have been part of a precursor network to the Silk Road, trading goods, technologies, and ideas with their neighbors long before the term was ever coined. Their very presence forces us to redraw the map of the ancient world, revealing it not as a collection of isolated civilizations, but as a dynamic, interconnected web where people, goods, and genes moved across astonishing distances much earlier than we ever believed. The Turin mummies are not merely well-preserved corpses. They are emissaries from a forgotten chapter of human history, challenging our neat categories of East and West and testifying to the enduring, wandering spirit of humanity. Nestled within the lush, rolling hills of the Xingquang Plateau in Laos lies a site that seems to belong more to the realm of giants than to human history. Here, scattered across dozens of sites, rest thousands of colossal stone jars, some standing upright, others lying on their sides, silent and mysterious against the green landscape. This is the Plain of Jars, a vast megalithic archaeological landscape that remains one of Southeast Asia's most profound enigmas. The jars themselves are hewn from sandstone and granite, and their sizes are staggering, ranging from manageable vessels of 3 feet in height to true behemoths that stand nearly 10 feet tall and weigh several tons. Many are cylindrical, while others are more angular or oval-shaped, and a number feature a distinct carved lip around the rim, suggesting they were originally designed to hold lids, though very few of these covers have ever been found. The immediate and obvious question that has captivated archaeologists and visitors for decades is a simple one. What was the purpose of these immense containers, and who went to such extraordinary effort to carve and place them here? The prevailing theory, supported by the archaeological evidence uncovered so far, points to a complex funerary practice. Excavations led by researchers like the Australian archaeologist Dr. Julie van den Berg have uncovered human remains such as bone fragments and teeth buried in and around the jars, along with a variety of grave goods including ceramic pots, glass beads, and iron tools. This evidence strongly suggests that the jars were used for what is known as excarnation, or sky burial. In this practice, the deceased would be placed inside a jar where the body would be left to decompose, often aided by the elements or perhaps through a more deliberate process. After the soft tissues had decayed, the remaining bones might then be collected for a secondary burial, either being reinterred in a smaller ceramic vessel or buried in the earth nearby. The presence of limestone blocks inside some jars supports this idea, as limestone can accelerate decomposition. The carved lips and the rare stone discs that appear to be lids could have been part of this ritual, perhaps to contain the remains or to protect them during the process. The Plain of Jars, in this view, was not a settlement but a vast, sacred necropolis, a final resting place that served a culture or a confederation of communities across many generations, dating from the Iron Age, possibly as far back as 500 BC to 500 AD. However, a compelling alternative theory suggests a more communal, celebratory purpose. Local legend, passed down through the centuries, tells a story of a powerful king named Kun Cheung, who, after a great military victory, commanded the creation of the jars to brew and store enormous quantities of rice wine or lao lao to celebrate his triumph. While this sounds like pure folklore, it touches on a plausible utilitarian function. The jars could have been used for storing food, water, or fermentation on a massive scale, serving a large, organized population that lived in the area. The logistical challenge of creating so many huge vessels for storage alone implies a sophisticated society with agricultural surpluses and the need for communal gathering places. It is also possible, and indeed highly likely, that the jars served a dual purpose, that their primary function was funerary, but that they also played a central role in ancestor veneration festivals. The communities that used this plane may have gathered there periodically for ceremonies to honor their dead, using the same jars that held the remains as the focal point for feasting and drinking, thereby blurring the line between the funerary and the communal. The true purpose might not be a simple either-or, but a complex blending of the sacred and the social, where death and life were intertwined in a single, monumental landscape. The identity of the jar makers is another layer of the mystery. Unlike the builders of Angkor Wat or the Egyptian pharaohs, this culture left behind no written records, no grand temples, and no definitive carvings that depict their society or rulers. All we have are the jars themselves and the sparse collection of artifacts found buried with the dead. This anonymity makes their achievement all the more striking. The quarrying, shaping, and transportation of these multi-ton stone jars from nearby mountains to their current locations would have required a highly organized society with skilled artisans and a deep understanding of stone working. They likely used iron chisels and picks to shape the jars, and may have moved them using a combination of wooden rollers, ropes, and earthen ramps, a monumental effort requiring the coordination of many people. The distribution of the jars across such a wide area suggests this was a central cultural practice for a widespread population, perhaps a network of chiefdoms united by a common belief system. The mystery of who they were is deepened by the fact that the modern ethnic groups living in the region today, such as the Hmong and the Khmu, have no oral traditions of building the jars, viewing them instead as ancient and sacred relics left by a people long gone, or as the work of mythical figures from a lost age. Tragically, the quest to unravel these secrets has been overshadowed by a much more immediate and deadly danger. The Xiang Quang Plateau was one of the most heavily bombed regions during the Vietnam War, as it lay along the supply route known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail. For nearly a decade, American forces dropped countless cluster bombs and other ordnance on the area, and a staggering number of these bombs failed to detonate on impact. To this day, the Plain of Jars is littered with unexploded ordnance, a lethal legacy that has claimed thousands of lives since the war ended and has rendered vast sections of the archaeological site completely inaccessible. This ongoing peril has severely hampered archaeological work, making systematic excavation a slow, dangerous, and expensive process that must be preceded by meticulous bomb clearance operations conducted by specialized teams. The very ground that holds the answers to an ancient mystery is booby-trapped with remnants of a modern conflict, creating a heartbreaking paradox where the search for knowledge about life and death in the past is perpetually threatened by the instruments of death from a more recent past. The Plain of Jars thus stands as a doubly poignant monument, a silent testament to a lost civilization whose secrets are guarded not only by the passage of time, but by the unforgiving and deadly debris of war, a stark reminder of how the shadows of history can linger, shaping and limiting our understanding of the ancient world. From the silent, open plains of Laos, we now turn to a mystery confined within the covers of a single, massive book, a volume so large and heavy that it is said to have required 2 people just to lift it. This is the Codex Gigas, more famously known as the Devil's Bible, and it is the largest surviving medieval manuscript in the entire world. Created in the early 13th century within the Benedictine monastery of Podlages in Bohemia, now part of the Czech Republic, this book is a behemoth in every sense. Its pages, made from the skins of over 160 donkeys, measure an astonishing 36 inches tall and 20 inches wide, and the complete volume is nearly 9 inches thick, weighing in at about 165 pounds. To even turn its vellum pages requires immense care and strength, But the Codex Gigas is not famous merely for its physical dimensions. Its contents and the dark legend that clings to it have made it one of the most intriguing and unsettling artifacts to survive from the Middle Ages. The central enigma of the Devil's Bible is not just what it contains, but who created it and under what circumstances. The prevailing theory, supported by handwriting analysis, is that the entire monumental work was penned by a single, solitary scribe. The script throughout the codex is remarkably consistent, showing no significant variation in style, ink, or pen pressure that would suggest multiple authors working in shifts, as was common for projects of this scale. This single monk likely dedicated decades of his life to this single task, a testament to a vow of silence, patience, and devotion that is almost incomprehensible in our modern era. Yet, this act of profound piety is directly contradicted by the book's most famous feature, the one that earned it its diabolical nickname. Just after a complete copy of the Latin Vulgate Bible, the scribe included a breathtaking, full-page illustration of the devil himself. This is not a small, marginal doodle, it is a dominant, confronting image. The devil is depicted as a large, monstrous figure, alone on the page, with white claws, two sharp, red-tipped horns, and a ghastly greenish face crouching in an empty landscape. The figure is simultaneously powerful and imprisoned within the confines of the page, a visual representation of evil that is both terrifying and fascinating. The presence of this vivid, full-page portrait of the ultimate antagonist in a holy book is a profound paradox that demanded an explanation, and medieval minds were quick to provide one. This is where history bleeds into legend, creating the story that has captivated people for centuries. According to the tale, the scribe was a monk who had broken his monastic vows and was sentenced to be walled up alive as punishment, a horrific death. In his desperation, the monk promised he would create, in a single night, a book that would contain all human knowledge and bring everlasting glory to his monastery. As the night wore on, he realized the impossibility of his task. In a final, desperate act, he is said to have prayed not to God, but to the fallen archangel Lucifer, offering his soul in exchange for the completion of the book. Satan, so the story goes, answered the call, and together they finished the massive codex before the first light of dawn. The legend provides a neat, if chilling, explanation for the book's existence, directly linking the superhuman feat of a single scribe to a demonic pact. It specifically states that the monk, in gratitude for the devil's help, included the large portrait of his benefactor as a tribute, ensuring the book would forever bear his mark. Of course, modern historical analysis dismantles this dramatic narrative, but in doing so, uncovers a reality that is, in its own way, just as compelling. The idea that the Codex Gigas was written in a single night is a physical impossibility. Analysis of the ink and script suggests the work took a minimum of 20 to 30 years of continuous, dedicated labor to complete. The monk did not need supernatural aid, he needed a lifetime of unwavering discipline. But why would a single person undertake such a monumental task? The answer is likely a complex mix of piety, penance, and the practical needs of his community. The monastery at Podlages was small and poor, and the creation of such an invaluable and comprehensive volume could have been a strategic move to elevate its status, attract pilgrims and patrons, and serve as a source of immense pride. It might also have been an act of supreme personal atonement. Perhaps the scribe had indeed committed a grave sin, and his order, instead of walling him up, sentenced him to a lifetime of labor. The creation of this book was his penance, a way to work towards his salvation through decades of devoted, solitary work. In this light, the portrait of the devil takes on a different meaning. It was not a tribute but a stark warning, a visual representation of the evil and temptation that the monk was resisting through his very act of creation. It served as a constant reminder of the spiritual battle every Christian soul was believed to wage, a depiction of the adversary that made the holy text surrounding it all the more powerful and necessary. Beyond the Bible and the devil, the contents of the Codex Gigas reveal its true purpose as a complete library in a single volume, designed to be a one-stop repository of essential knowledge. It contains not only the Old and New Testaments in Latin, but also a wealth of other crucial texts. These include the Etymology by Isidore of Seville, a massive encyclopedia that was a cornerstone of medieval learning, the Jewish Antiquities by Flavius Josephus, which provided a historical context for the biblical world, a history of Bohemia by Cosmas of Prague, and a range of medical texts, calendars, and penitential forms for confession. This collection was a survival kit for a monastic community, containing everything needed for spiritual guidance, historical understanding, practical medicine, and scholarly reference. The very act of compiling all this knowledge into one place was a statement of ambition, an attempt to capture the sum of human and divine understanding between two covers. The book's later history is also telling. It was taken as war booty by the Swedish army in 1648 from Prague Castle during the 30 Years' War and has remained in the National Library of Sweden ever since. Its value was so immense that it was treated not just as a book but as a treasure, a trophy of knowledge and power. The Codex Gigas, therefore, stands at the crossroads of faith and fear, of human capability and supernatural legend. It is a monument to the incredible willpower of one anonymous individual whose identity is lost to time, but whose legacy is a book that continues to inspire awe and wonder, challenging us to see not a pact with the devil, but the profound, almost superhuman power of dedicated human conviction. But while the Devil's Bible represents a mystery of creation, our next enigma is one of pure disappearance, a vanishing act that has haunted the American imagination for centuries. In the late 16th century, England was locked in a fierce rivalry with Spain, desperate to establish a permanent foothold in the New World to rival the Spanish colonies. Under the ambitious sponsorship of Sir Walter Raleigh, an expedition landed in 1587 on a small, protected island off the coast of what is now North Carolina. This was Roanoke Island, and the 115 settlers, men, women, and children, were tasked with building the first permanent English settlement in America. Their governor, John White, was an artist and mapmaker, and his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, would become the first English child born in the Americas. The colony's start was precarious, and by the end of that first difficult summer, Governor White was persuaded to sail back to England to secure more supplies and reinforcements. His departure was meant to be brief, but history had other plans. The Anglo-Spanish War erupted, and every seaworthy English ship was commandeered for the nation's defense, including the one intended for his return. For 3 agonizing years, White was trapped in England, unable to reach his family and the colony he had left behind. When he finally managed to secure passage and landed back on Roanoke Island in August of 1590, he stepped into a ghost town. The settlement was completely deserted. The log palisade they had built stood intact, but the houses within had been carefully dismantled, a sign of orderly departure, not a panicked flight. There were no signs of a struggle, no graves, and no human remains. The only clues were 2 cryptic carvings. On a wooden post at the entrance to the fort, the word Croatoan had been carved in capital letters. On a nearby tree, the letters Crow were found. To White, these were not messages of distress. Before he had left, he had given the colonists explicit instructions. If they were forced to leave the island, they should carve a Maltese cross into a tree as a sign that their departure was made under duress. There was no cross. The single word Croatoan was likely meant to tell him exactly where they had gone. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island, which was home to a tribe of Native Americans who had been friendly to the English and whose leader, Manteo, had even traveled to England. White felt a surge of hope, believing he would find the colonists safe and sound living with their allies. But a sudden, violent storm blew up, damaging his ships and forcing the crew to abandon their search and sail for the safety of the open sea. He never set foot on Croatoan Island, and he never saw his colonists again. This simple, unanswered question, what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke, has spawned a multitude of theories, each with its own compelling evidence and frustrating gaps. The most enduring and widely accepted explanation is that the colonists, facing starvation and isolation after 3 years without resupply, did exactly what their carving suggested. They split into smaller groups and integrated with local Native American tribes. The Croatoan carving was a straightforward message pointing to their destination. Proponents of this theory point to later accounts from English explorers and settlers at Jamestown 20 years later. Captain John Smith, leader of the Jamestown colony, heard reports from Powhatan chiefs about white people living with tribes to the south. He was even shown an English-made musket and a metal pot that was said to have come from these people. The most detailed account came decades later from a Jamestown settler named John Lawson, who visited Hatteras Island in the early 1700s. He reported meeting Native Americans with gray eyes who claimed their ancestors were white people who could talk in a book, a clear reference to reading. Some of the Hatteras Indians even had the surname Dial, which is intriguingly close to Dare, the surname of the first English child born at Roanoke, Virginia Dare. This integration theory paints a picture not of tragedy, but of survival and assimilation, where the colonists, unable to sustain their European way of life, were absorbed into the complex social fabric of the indigenous peoples, their bloodlines and perhaps some of their stories continuing for generations. A second, darker theory posits that the colonists were simply wiped out. The Roanoke settlement had a troubled history from the start. A previous military expedition had ended in conflict with the neighboring Secotan tribe, leaving a legacy of distrust and hostility. It is possible that after Governor White left, relations with a local group deteriorated into violence. The colonists could have been attacked and massacred, their bodies either carried away or disposed of in a way that left no trace for White to find 3 years later. Alternatively, they may have attempted to sail back to England in a small, makeshift boat and been lost at sea, or succumbed to disease or starvation on the island itself. The problem with the massacre theory is the lack of any archaeological evidence. No mass graves have been found on Roanoke Island, and the orderly state of the abandoned settlement with its dismantled houses suggests a planned departure, not a sudden, violent end. A fascinating third theory combines elements of the first two, suggesting the colonists tried to relocate but met with disaster. Perhaps a core group did set out for Croatoan Island, while others attempted to move inland, following the instructions White had left to carve their destination at the entrance to the settlement. They might have traveled 50 miles inland to the mouth of the Chowan River, where a friendly tribe called the Chowanoke was known to have a powerful chiefdom. There they could have built a new settlement, only to be later attacked and dispersed by a rival tribe, possibly the same Powhatan Confederacy that later threatened Jamestown. Some researchers point to a mysterious set of European-style objects, including a signet ring and stone fortifications, found in this inland area, though the connection to the lost colony remains speculative. The mystery has only deepened in the 21st century with a project known as the Lost Colony Center for Science and Research, which has used ground-penetrating radar and soil analysis to identify a site 50 miles inland, dubbed Site X, where they believe a small group of the colonists may have lived for a time. Artifacts found there, including fragments of Elizabethan pottery and a personal item that might have belonged to a high-status colonist, offer tantalizing, though still inconclusive, clues that the colonists may have split up and moved further than originally thought. The enduring power of the Roanoke story lies in its perfect storm of ambiguity. It is a historical cold case with a clear starting point and an utterly opaque conclusion. It represents the terrifying vulnerability of those first European footholds in America, a stark reminder of how thin the thread of survival was. The single word Croatoan is a maddening clue. It feels like it should be the key to the whole puzzle, yet it has only led to more questions. The story of the lost colony has become a foundational American legend, a ghost that has haunted the national psyche from the very beginning. It speaks to our deepest fears of being lost, of being forgotten, and of civilizations simply vanishing into the wilderness, leaving behind nothing but a whisper on the wind and a name carved in wood. Just when you thought the deep mysteries were confined to ancient tombs and deserts, the ocean itself presents a chilling tale from the not-so-distant past that rivals any fictional ghost ship story. On the 5th of December 1872, the Canadian merchant brigantine Dei Gracia was sailing through a calm Atlantic, about 400 miles off the coast of Portugal, when her crew spotted another ship drifting erratically on the horizon. As they drew closer, they recognized the vessel as the Mary Celeste, a brigantine that had left New York for Genoa, Italy, just a few weeks before them. Captain David Morehouse of the Dei Gracia knew the Mary Celeste's captain, Benjamin Briggs, personally, and was immediately concerned. He signaled the ship but received no reply. Through his spyglass, he could see that her sails were partially set, but some were in tatters, and she was yawing sluggishly, her helm unmanned. Something was very wrong. After signaling for hours with no response, Morehouse sent a boarding party over to the eerily silent vessel. What they found, or more accurately, what they did not find, would become the cornerstone of one of maritime history's greatest riddles. The scene that greeted the boarding party was one of profound and unsettling abandonment. The Mary Celeste was perfectly seaworthy, taking on only a small amount of water in her hold, which was normal for a wooden ship of her size. Her cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol was largely intact and secure. There was plenty of food and fresh water in the stores, enough to last the crew for many more months at sea. In the crew's quarters, the personal belongings of the 10 people on board Captain Briggs, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and the 7 crewmen were all neatly stowed as if they had just stepped out for a moment. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of violence, and no damage to the ship that would indicate a collision or a pirate attack. Yet the ship's only lifeboat was missing. The last entry in the ship's log, dated 10 days earlier, recorded a position near the Azores and noted nothing more alarming than rough weather, which had since passed. The most telling clue was a single, thick cut along the ship's rail, as if a rope had been deliberately severed in a hurry. The crew of the Dei Gracia had stumbled upon a classic ghost ship, a vessel in prime condition, mysteriously deserted by every single soul on board without any discernible reason. They sailed the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, where a formal salvage hearing was convened, but no investigation could ever determine what had prompted such a sudden and complete evacuation. Theories attempting to explain the fate of the Mary Celeste's crew are as numerous as they are compelling, ranging from the rational to the wildly speculative. One of the earliest and most dramatic suspicions was piracy or mutiny. However, this theory quickly falls apart under scrutiny. There was no plunder to be had, the valuable cargo of alcohol was untouched, and the crew's personal possessions, including money and jewelry, were left behind, something no pirate or mutineer would likely do. Furthermore, Captain Briggs was known as a capable and fair commander, and the crew was experienced, making a violent, bloody mutiny seem highly improbable given the complete lack of any signs of a fight. A much more scientifically grounded theory involves the ship's cargo. The 1,701 barrels in the hold contained denatured alcohol, a highly volatile substance. The investigation in Gibraltar noted that 9 of the barrels were empty, and their staves showed signs of having been ruptured from the inside, likely by the expansion of fermenting gases. It is possible that fumes from these leaking barrels filled the hold, creating a massive, invisible cloud. Captain Briggs, fearing an imminent and catastrophic explosion, might have given the order to abandon ship with extreme haste. They would have taken to the lifeboat, tethering it to the Mary Celeste with a long rope with the intention of boarding again once the danger had passed. This scenario explains the hastily cut rope found on the rail. Tragically, a sudden squall could have then snapped that tether, or the wind could have filled the sails of the Mary Celeste, pulling her away from the tiny, overloaded lifeboat, leaving the crew to the mercy of the open ocean. This remains the most widely accepted explanation among historians, as it accounts for the panic-driven departure and the seaworthy state of the abandoned vessel. Other plausible theories focus on maritime equipment failure. The ship's chronometer, a vital instrument for navigation, was found to be faulty. If it gave a dangerously inaccurate reading of their longitude, Captain Briggs might have believed he was much closer to land than he actually was. If he then saw signs of what he thought was shallow water, perhaps a mirage or a strange sea condition, he may have mistakenly feared the ship was about to run aground on a reef and ordered an immediate evacuation. Another fascinating idea involves a phenomenon known as a seaquake, an undersea earthquake that can create a massive shockwave of pressure without a visible surface wave. Such an event could have rocked the ship violently, causing the crew to believe they had struck a submerged object and were taking on water faster than they actually were, prompting another panicked flight to the lifeboat. The enduring power of the Mary Celeste mystery, however, lies not in choosing one theory over another, but in the chilling finality of its empty decks. It is a story of a single, catastrophic decision made under duress, a decision that turned a routine voyage into a permanent vanishing. The ocean kept its secret, and the 10 souls who left that perfectly sound ship were never seen or heard from again, their fate swallowed by the very waves they sought to escape. The Mary Celeste herself became a cursed legend, passing through many owners and meeting an ignoble end when she was deliberately wrecked for insurance money years later. A final, sad chapter for a ship forever defined by the day her crew simply disappeared into the thin sea air. From the vast, empty expanse of the open ocean, we now journey into the damp, still earth of northern Europe, where the very ground has acted as a perfect preservative, holding onto its secrets for 2,000 years. Across the peat bogs of countries like Ireland, the United Kingdom, Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands, workers cutting fuel for the winter have, for centuries, made the most chilling of discoveries. They have unearthed human bodies, but not mere skeletons. These individuals, known collectively as the bog bodies, are preserved with an eerie, lifelike quality that is both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Their skin is tanned dark brown by the bog's acids, their hair and facial features are often perfectly intact, and their fingernails can still be seen. But this remarkable preservation comes with a grim reality. Many of these people met extraordinarily violent ends. They are not the remains of those who simply fell in and drowned. They are the victims of deliberate, often ritualized killing, left in the bog's embrace and forgotten by time until the modern peat cutter's spade brought them back into the light. The condition of these bodies is a story in itself, written in chemistry and time. The unique environment of a peat bog is what makes this possible. The water is cold and acidic, low in oxygen, and rich with sphagnum moss. This combination halts the normal process of bacterial decay that would otherwise consume a body. The acid in the water tans the skin, much like the process used to make leather, while the moss helps draw calcium from the bones, leaving them soft and pliable, sometimes even completely dissolved. This is why many bog bodies are found with their skin and internal organs remarkably intact, but with skeletons that have become like rubber. The bog itself seems to choose what to keep and what to discard, creating a hauntingly detailed portrait of a person from the distant past. We can see the lines on their faces, the style of their hair sometimes elaborately arranged, and even the calluses on their hands. This incredible level of preservation allows forensic archaeologists to perform analyses that would be impossible on a skeleton alone, giving us an intimate and often disturbing window into their final hours. And it is the final hours that contain the central, chilling mystery. The evidence of violence is stark and undeniable. Take the famous Toland man discovered in Denmark in 1950. He was so well preserved that the discoverers thought they had found a recent murder victim. He lies in a peaceful, sleeping posture, a gentle expression on his face. Yet around his neck is a braided leather rope pulled tight into a noose. He had been hanged. Then there is the Gråball man, also from Denmark. His throat was cut from ear to ear, a wound so deep it likely severed his windpipe and carotid artery in a single brutal slice. Lindo man, found in a bog in Cheshire, England, suffered a cascade of violence. He was struck on the head with a heavy object, garroted with a sinew cord that broke his neck, and then his throat was cut for good measure. This triple death speaks to a ceremony with specific, unforgiving steps. These are not the marks of a simple skirmish or a casual murder. They point to something deliberate, something symbolic, and something sanctioned by the society of the Iron Age. So, who were these people, and why were they killed in such a formal, brutal manner? There are several leading theories, each painting a different picture of Iron Age society and its beliefs. One of the most widely accepted ideas is that these individuals were human sacrifices, offered to the gods of the bog to ensure fertility, a good harvest, or to appease deities during a time of crisis. The bogs themselves were not random dumping grounds. They were liminal spaces seen as gateways to the otherworld, places of immense spiritual power where the veil between the human and divine realms was thin. Depositing a valuable offering, a human life, into such a place would have been a powerful act of communication with the gods. The careful, almost posed placement of some bodies, like the Toland man, and the evidence of a last meal supports this. Analysis of the stomach contents of Toland man revealed that his final meal was a simple porridge made of barley, flax, and other seeds, with no evidence of meat. This was not a festive Last Supper, but a humble, perhaps ritual meal. Another theory suggests these were criminals or social outcasts being executed for their crimes. Roman writers like Tacitus, who documented the practices of Germanic tribes, noted that those convicted of crimes like cowardice, desertion, or adultery were sometimes punished by being drowned in a bog. In this interpretation, the bog was not a sacred altar but a place of ultimate disgrace, a watery prison for those who had transgressed societal laws. The violence could then be seen not as a ritual but as the prescribed method of capital punishment. However, the evidence sometimes contradicts this. Many of the bog bodies show signs of having been well cared for in life. Their hands show no signs of hard manual labor. Their nails are well manicured, and analysis of their hair and teeth indicates a good, stable diet. This has led to a third compelling idea, that these were high-status individuals, perhaps even kings or chieftains, who were ritually killed after a failed reign. In some early Celtic societies, a king was married to the land, and if the land became infertile or the tribe suffered defeats, the king himself could be held responsible and sacrificed to restore the balance and usher in a new era of prosperity. The most poignant clues come from the most intimate details. The last meals tell a story of season and purpose. Toland man's simple porridge points to a death in the winter or early spring, when stored grains were the primary food source. Gråball man, on the other hand, had consumed a much more varied meal containing meat, which might point to a different time of year or a different type of ritual. Grooming is another powerful indicator. The Toland man's hair was closely cropped and he had recently shaved. His cap, found nearby, was meticulously repaired. The Clonacefn man from Ireland used a sophisticated hair gel made from pine resin, imported from southwestern France, to style his hair into a tall, dramatic fashion. This care taken with their appearance just before death strongly suggests they were being prepared for an important event. They were not dragged from a field or a prison. They were groomed, fed a specific meal, and then led to the bog to meet their fate in a ceremony that their community believed was necessary for the greater good. The bog bodies force us to confront a complex and uncomfortable aspect of our past, where spirituality, justice, and power were inextricably linked with sanctioned violence, and where the border between murder and sacrifice was a line drawn not by our modern morals, but by the deep, dark waters of a faith we can only strive to understand. While the Nazca Lines capture the world's imagination with their enormous animal figures, another South American marvel, far larger and perhaps even more enigmatic, lies largely forgotten on a high plateau in Bolivia. Imagine the Nazca Lines not as individual drawings, but as a continent-spanning web of perfectly straight pathways, and you begin to grasp the staggering scale of the Sajama Lines. Located in the remote and breathtakingly harsh Altiplano of western Bolivia, near the towering, snow-capped Nevado Sajama volcano, this is a network of ancient linear paths that is almost beyond comprehension. It is not a single site, but a vast complex of thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands, of individual lines etched into the dry, crusty earth. These paths, which run in perfectly straight trajectories for astonishing distances, crisscross an area of nearly 22,000 square kilometers, an area larger than the entire state of New Jersey. This makes the Sajama Lines the largest archaeological artwork in the entire world, a title that alone should command global fascination, yet it remains one of the least known and studied ancient wonders. The lines themselves are deceptively simple in design. They are not flamboyant biomorphs, but clean, purposeful paths created by scraping away the dark, oxidized surface layer of the soil to reveal the lighter, sandy-colored earth beneath. They range in width from 1 to 3 meters, and while some are just a few hundred meters long, others stretch with unwavering determination for over 20 kilometers, marching across the flat plains, up and over hills, and through valleys without the slightest deviation from their course. This sheer, relentless linearity is the first great puzzle. How, and more importantly why, did ancient peoples invest such immense, coordinated effort into marking this vast landscape with a web of straight lines, visible only in their entirety from the air? The Sajama Lines are believed to have been created by the ancestors of the indigenous Aymara people, with construction potentially spanning a period from as early as 3,000 years ago up to the arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century. This was not the work of a single generation, but a cultural project that unfolded over centuries, a testament to a sustained and shared purpose that bound together communities across this high-altitude desert, living at elevations of over 12,000 feet where the very air is thin and every physical task requires monumental effort. The creation of the lines would have been a massive communal undertaking. Teams of people, likely organized by local chieftains or religious leaders, would have walked the predetermined routes using simple tools to scrape and clear the path. The real engineering marvel, however, lies in their surveying. Achieving such long, straight lines over rugged, uneven terrain required a sophisticated understanding of geometry and sightlining. The builders almost certainly used a series of marker posts or aligned natural landmarks on the distant horizon, the peak of a mountain, a distinctive rock formation, to maintain their precise bearings across kilometers of open ground. The stability of the arid, windswept landscape has preserved their work for centuries, a fragile network of human intention scratched into the skin of the earth. The central, haunting question is the purpose of this colossal endeavor. Unlike Nazca, where theories lean heavily toward the ritual and astronomical, the Sajama Lines present a more complex and practical set of possibilities. One of the most compelling theories is that they functioned as a vast, sacred pilgrimage route. The lines often connect small settlements, burial towers known as cholpas, and ancient shrines, weaving the sacred geography of the region into a single, interconnected web. In this view, the paths were not just for physical travel, but for spiritual journeys. Pilgrims would have walked these straight lines as acts of devotion, moving between holy sites in a ritual that connected them to their ancestors, their gods, and the powerful mountain deities or achikillas that dominate the landscape. The very act of walking the line was a form of prayer, a physical manifestation of a spiritual connection to the land. A second, and equally plausible, theory posits that the lines were primarily practical trade and communication routes. The Altiplano was part of a much larger network of interaction, with goods like obsidian, salt, and textiles moving across great distances. These perfectly straight paths would have served as guides for llama caravans, the trucks of the ancient Andes navigating the featureless plains. In a landscape with few natural landmarks, a visible, straight path leading directly to a distant settlement or a mountain pass would have been an invaluable navigational aid. The lines could have also been used for rapid communication, with runners moving along the clear paths to relay messages between communities separated by vast, empty stretches of land. Perhaps the most fascinating idea is that the system served both purposes simultaneously, reflecting a worldview where the practical and the spiritual were inseparable. Walking a trade route could also have been a pilgrimage. Following a sacred path also facilitated the movement of goods and information. The lines may have also had an astronomical function, with some of the longest pathways aligned with the rising and setting of the sun, moon, or specific stars during important dates in the agricultural and ceremonial calendar. This would have tied the everyday rhythms of life to the cosmic order, creating a lived-in calendar inscribed across the entire territory. The true mystery of the Sajama lines is not a lack of plausible explanations, but an abundance of them layered one on top of the other. They represent a different kind of ancient marvel, not a single, concentrated monument, but a diffuse, landscape-scale expression of human organization and belief. They force us to expand our definition of what ancient engineering could be, moving beyond pyramids and temples to appreciate a civilization that imprinted its logic and its faith not on a single point, but across the very fabric of its world. They stand as a testament to a culture that saw the immense, empty expanse of the Altiplano not as a barrier, but as a canvas, and who chose to fill it with a quiet, purposeful geometry whose ultimate meaning continues to whisper on the high Andean wind. But long before the Romans marched across Europe, and even before the great stones of Carnac were raised, another culture in the heart of what is now Germany was looking to the sky with a sophistication that would not be matched for millennia. In the quiet German countryside near the town of Goseck, a circular pattern discovered through aerial photography was excavated in the early 2000s to reveal one of the most startling and ancient astronomical sites in the world, the Goseck Circle. This is not a structure of towering stone, but a simple yet profound arrangement of earth, wood, and ditch, a Neolithic monument dating back an astonishing 4,900 years, making it the oldest known solar observatory in Europe. Originally, it consisted of 4 concentric circles, a low outer bank, a deep ditch, and then 2 inner palisades of solid wooden stakes, standing over 9 feet tall, with 3 sets of gates positioned at precise points. When archaeologists first began to piece together the layout, they realized the southern gates aligned perfectly with the rising and setting sun during the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. On that pivotal morning, as the sun peaked over the horizon, its rays would have shone directly through the southeast gate, traveled across the center of the circle, and exited through the southwest gate, creating a precise, illuminated pathway. This was not a lucky alignment. It was deliberate, engineered architecture designed to capture a specific celestial event, a giant calendar built into the landscape by a people whose name we do not even know, but whose legacy is a testament to the universal human drive to understand the cosmos. The builders of the Goseck Circle were part of what archaeologists call the stroke-ornamented ware culture, a late Neolithic people who were later succeeded in the region by the corded ware culture. These were Europe's first farmers, settlers who had transitioned from a nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle to one rooted in agriculture, raising crops like emmer wheat and barley and domesticating animals. This shift in how they lived fundamentally changed their relationship with time and the sky. Their survival now depended on knowing precisely when to plant and when to harvest. A mistake of a few weeks could mean the difference between a bountiful winter and starvation. The Goseck circle, in its most practical interpretation, was the ultimate farmer's almanac, a massive, immovable timepiece that marked the sun's lowest point in the sky and promised the gradual return of longer, warmer days. It gave this early society the power to predict the turning of the seasons with absolute certainty, allowing them to plan their agricultural cycle and coordinate communal labor. But to see it as merely a practical tool is to miss the deeper, more profound reality of the Neolithic mind. For these people, the sun was not just a celestial clock, it was a living deity, a powerful force whose cyclical death and rebirth were matters of spiritual life and death. The circle was almost certainly a temple, a sacred space where the community would gather to perform rituals aimed at encouraging the sun's return. Imagine the atmosphere inside that wooden enclosure on the dawn of the winter solstice, the air bitingly cold, the sky still dark. As the community watched, priests or elders would have stood at the center, and as the first sliver of sun broke the horizon and cast its beam through the narrow gate, it would have been a moment of collective relief and powerful magic. They had not just measured an astronomical event, they had participated in it, ensuring through their ceremony that the cosmic order would continue, that the sun would be reborn, and that life itself would persevere. What makes the Goseck circle even more compelling is that it is not an isolated phenomenon. It is part of a much wider tradition of circular enclosures, known to archaeologists as Kreisgräbnanlagen, that are scattered across Central Europe. Over 150 of these earthwork circles have been identified, from Austria to Slovakia and Germany, creating a cultural network that shared this astronomical knowledge. The Goseck circle, however, stands out for its age and its extraordinary precision. This was not the work of simple farmers dabbling in sky watching. It reveals a sophisticated, long-term program of observation. To determine the exact point on the horizon for the solstice sunrise, the builders would have needed to track the sun's movement for generations, carefully noting its most southerly position year after year before committing that knowledge to a permanent, monumental structure. This implies a structured society with a specialized priestly or astronomer class who held and passed on this sacred knowledge. The connection to later European sites is undeniable and profound. While separated by thousands of years and miles, the same fundamental impulse that drove the builders of Goseck to mark the sun's path and sanctify that relationship would later find expression in the grand stone circles of Stonehenge in England and the complex alignments of Carnac in France. Goseck is a precursor, a foundational blueprint for humanity's enduring quest to build its faith and its future in alignment with the heavens. The mystery that remains is not so much about how they built it, but about the society that felt such an urgent need to do so. The circle was in use for only about 200 years before it was deliberately dismantled, its wooden posts removed and the ditches filled in, as if its purpose had been served or its power was no longer needed. The people moved on, their culture evolving into the corded ware people who would spread across Europe, perhaps carrying with them the astronomical seeds first planted in that simple, sacred circle in Goseck. And now we turn our attention to a mystery that is not a question of what happened, but a question of where, a secret so fiercely guarded that an entire empire went to unimaginable lengths to ensure it would never be found. This is the search for the final resting place of Genghis Khan. In 1227, the Great Khan, the fearsome founder of the Mongol Empire, died. His empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Yet, for a man who commanded such unimaginable power, his burial was an act of supreme secrecy and ruthlessness. According to the accounts passed down, his funeral procession was a grim affair. The soldiers who escorted his body to its final resting place killed every person they encountered along the route to prevent them from revealing the direction. Once the tomb was sealed, the soldiers themselves were then allegedly killed by a second group of soldiers, who were in turn executed, creating a chain of silence that has lasted for nearly 800 years. It is said that 1,000 horses were then ridden back and forth over the burial site to trample the earth, completely erasing any trace of the grave, and some legends even claim that a river was diverted to flow over the spot, forever sealing it beneath water and silt. The goal was absolute. The location of Genghis Khan's tomb was to be a secret for all time. The historical and cultural significance of finding this tomb is almost incalculable. Unlike the looted tombs of Egyptian pharaohs, the tomb of Genghis Khan has likely remained completely undisturbed. Given the power and wealth of the Mongol Empire at its peak, his burial chamber would not be a simple affair. Historians and archaeologists speculate it could contain a treasure trove of artifacts from across the known world: precious metals, silks, weapons, and perhaps most importantly, written records that could offer an unparalleled first-hand look into the inner workings of the Mongol court. For Mongolia, finding the tomb is a matter of profound national and spiritual identity. Genghis Khan is not merely a historical figure. He is the revered father of the nation, a symbol of unity and strength. His spirit is believed to be a protector of the land and its people. This deep reverence is the source of the greatest obstacle facing any search: powerful cultural taboos. Many Mongols believe that disturbing the earth around a burial site, especially that of a great leader, will desecrate the spirit and bring terrible misfortune. The land itself is considered sacred, and digging is seen as an act of profound disrespect. For generations, these beliefs have acted as a more effective guardian than any army, keeping the secret safe from both foreign explorers and ambitious locals alike. Despite these taboos, the search has captivated explorers and scientists for a century, focusing on a few key regions. The most promising area, and the one steeped in the most legend, is the Khentai province in northeastern Mongolia. This is the Khan's birthplace, the region he called his homeland of the heart. Historical texts, particularly the secret history of the Mongols, hint that he was brought back here for burial. A mountain within this range, called Burkhan Koldun, is considered the most sacred of all candidate sites. Genghis Khan himself is said to have prayed on this mountain, claiming it saved his life early in his career, and he decreed that it should be venerated forever. In 2016, a major archaeological project focused on an area at the foot of Burkhan Koldun, uncovering the remains of a large ceremonial complex from the 13th century, complete with evidence of ritualistic fire worship. While this proved the site's immense religious importance to the Mongol Empire, it did not lead to the discovery of the tomb itself. The search here is like looking for a needle in a mountain range. The terrain is vast, remote, and incredibly difficult to access. Other theories have led expeditions to wildly different locations. Some researchers, interpreting old texts differently, have looked to the Avraga site near the ruins of Genghis Khan's first capital. Another, more fringe theory even suggested the tomb might be located in China's Inner Mongolia region. In more recent years, the search has gone high-tech. A much publicized project in the early 2000s, the Valley of the Khans project, used satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar to scan vast swaths of the Mongolian landscape without disturbing the soil. This non-invasive approach was designed to respect cultural sensitivities while using science to peer beneath the earth. The project identified dozens of promising anomalies, but none have yet yielded definitive proof. The challenge is immense. The tomb might not be a grand pyramid, but a simple chamber hidden so effectively that it blends perfectly into the natural landscape, just as its creators intended. The enduring enigma of Genghis Khan's tomb is a powerful clash of worlds. The relentless drive of modern archaeology and historical curiosity pitted against an ancient, deeply held spiritual belief. It forces us to ask a difficult question: is some knowledge better left buried? finding the tomb would be one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time, rewriting history books. But for many, the true legacy of Genghis Khan is not in the gold he may have been buried with, but in the spirit that still walks the vast, silent steppes of Mongolia, a secret kept safe by the land itself, the loyalty of his followers, and the respect of his descendants. Imagine a Viking warrior standing on the deck of his longship, the cold North Sea spray stinging his face. In his hand, he grips not just a weapon, but a technological marvel that sets him apart from every other fighter on the battlefield. This is the Ulfberht sword, a blade so far ahead of its time that its very existence rewrites our understanding of the Dark Ages. Dating from roughly the 9th to the 11th centuries, about 170 of these distinctive swords have been found scattered across Europe, from Viking burial sites in Norway to riverbeds in Poland. What makes them instantly recognizable is the name expertly inlaid into the blade with thin rods of contrasting metal, plus Ulfberht plus T. This inscription, with its specific spelling and the characteristic crosses, acts as a brand name, a mark of quality and origin that was trusted and feared. But the true magic of an Ulfberht sword isn't in its name, it's in the material from which it was forged. While most European swords of this era were made from what is called bloomery steel, a low-carbon, impure metal full of slag and other imperfections that made them brittle and prone to shattering in combat, the Ulfberht blades were something else entirely. Modern metallurgical analysis has revealed a shocking truth. They were made from a high-carbon crucible steel, a material of astounding purity and strength. This steel contained as much as 3 times the carbon content of its contemporaries, giving it a flexibility and a razor-sharp edge that would have been legendary. In the hands of a skilled warrior, an Ulfberht wouldn't just bend in a clash, it would spring back to true. It wouldn't shatter on a shield, it would bite deep. It was, for all intents and purposes, a superweapon. The process of making this crucible steel is the core of the mystery. To achieve such purity, iron ore must be heated to an extremely high temperature, melting completely in a sealed ceramic crucible. This allows the slag and impurities to separate out, leaving a near homogeneous ingot of high carbon steel. This was a technique known and mastered in the Islamic world, particularly in Persia and Central Asia, where blades from Damascus and elsewhere were famed for their quality. But in Europe, this knowledge was non-existent. The technology to generate the required furnace temperatures around 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit would not be developed again until the Industrial Revolution, nearly 800 years later. So how did a handful of Viking-age smiths, presumably working in Scandinavia or the Frankish Rhineland, gain access to this futuristic material and the knowledge to work it? The most compelling theory points directly to the vast and sophisticated trade networks the Vikings established, specifically the Volga trade route. This was not a path of plunder, but of commerce, a riverine highway that connected the Baltic Sea in the north to the Caspian Sea and the Abbasid Caliphate in the south. Viking traders, known in the east as the Rus, would have traveled these waterways, bringing furs, amber, and slaves to trade for the luxury goods of the Islamic world: silks, spices, silver coins, and, it seems, ingots of this exceptionally pure crucible steel. These raw steel blanks, sometimes called Wootz steel, could have been transported thousands of miles north, where master smiths operating under the Ulfberht name would then forge them into the distinctive high-performance blades. The inscription itself may have been a guarantee of authenticity, a way for these elite workshops to certify that the blade was made from genuine, imported crucible steel and not a local, inferior imitation. However, the story is not quite so simple. If the steel was imported, why did the Ulfberht tradition eventually die out, vanishing by the 12th century? One possibility is that the Volga trade route itself collapsed or was disrupted. Political upheavals in the Islamic world or the rise of rival powers along the route could have severed this supply chain, cutting off northern Europe from its source of high-quality steel. Without the raw material, the Ulfberht smiths could no longer produce their legendary blades, and the specialized knowledge of how to work it was lost. Another, more intriguing theory suggests that the Ulfberht workshop might have been producing its own crucible steel locally, having somehow acquired the secret of the high-temperature furnace. If this is true, then its disappearance is even more puzzling. Was the knowledge held by a single, secretive guild of smiths that died out without passing on its methods? Was it a technological dead end, too expensive and complex to sustain in a Europe that was still technologically fragmented? Perhaps the social and economic structures that supported such a specialized, high-end product simply faded away. The Ulfberht swords represent a fleeting moment of technological transcendence, a brief window where the Viking world connected with the advanced metallurgy of the East to produce something extraordinary. Their rise and fall mirror the flow of ideas and goods across the medieval world, a brilliant flash of innovation that shone brightly and then was extinguished, leaving behind only the ghost of its name stamped into steel, a silent witness to a lost art that would not be rediscovered for centuries. Off the coast of Japan's westernmost island, Yonaguni, lies a discovery that plunges us directly into the heart of a modern archaeological battleground, a mystery that lies not in a dusty tomb, but beneath the clear, blue waters of the Pacific Ocean. In 1986, a local diver seeking new sites to observe hammerhead sharks was stunned to find what appeared to be a massive, stepped pyramid rising from the seafloor. This is the Yonaguni Monument, a colossal collection of sandstone formations that instantly divided the scientific community and has fueled a passionate debate ever since. From one perspective, you see a sprawling complex of immense flat terraces, sharp 90-degree angles and towering stone pillars. There are what look like wide, ceremonial staircases, perfectly straight channels, and even a rock formation that bears an uncanny resemblance to a human face. The entire structure, covering an area larger than 2 football fields and rising nearly 80 feet from the seabed, feels unnaturally orderly, a grand architectural statement carved by human hands. Yet, from another viewpoint, you see the powerful, relentless work of nature, the result of millions of years of seismic activity, sandstone fracturing along natural plains, and the relentless sculpting power of ocean currents. The controversy is stark and fundamental. Are we looking at the ruins of one of the world's oldest and most advanced civilizations, a city swallowed by the sea, or are we simply witnessing the incredible power of natural geology, which can sometimes create forms that trick our pattern-seeking minds into seeing design where none exists? The core argument for the Yonaguni Monument being a man-made, or at least human-modified, structure rests on a collection of specific geometric features that proponents argue are too precise to be random. The most compelling of these is the so-called main terrace, a vast level platform that appears to have been deliberately carved and leveled. Its surface is punctuated by 2 towering monolithic pillars that seem strategically placed, as if to support a massive roof or mark a sacred space. Elsewhere, there are features that look like a triangular pool, a massive archway, and a series of steps that are remarkably uniform in both their height and depth, marching up the side of the formation with a rhythmic consistency that feels intentional. Perhaps the most striking element is a long, straight trench that runs for many meters, its walls forming near perfect right angles, a feature that geologists admit is rare in natural sandstone formations. Those who champion the artificial origin, most notably the marine geologist who first brought it to world attention, Masaki Kimura, point to these elements in combination. He and his team have spent decades surveying the site, mapping what they believe to be a complex that includes a castle, a triumphal arch, several temples, and even a stadium. They argue that the tool marks of this ancient civilization are visible on the rock faces, and they point to what appear to be smaller, carved stones resembling Qaeda script, a prehistoric writing system, though these finds remain highly contested. For Kimura and his supporters, the monument is a relic of a lost culture, potentially the sophisticated Jaman people, who inhabited Japan for over 10,000 years and are known for their complex spiritual beliefs and early pottery. This theory ties into a grander narrative of a lost Pacific continent, a civilization that thrived during the last ice age when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, and Yonaguni was part of a vast, exposed coastal plain. When the glaciers melted and the seas rose around 10,000 years ago, this entire world would have been submerged, preserving its structures on the seafloor as a ghostly underwater museum. However, the majority of mainstream geologists offer a powerful and elegant counter-argument, one that explains the monument's features through well-understood natural processes. They identify the rock as a sandstone and mudstone formation that is millions of years old, part of the region's active tectonic plate boundaries. This area is one of the most seismically active on the planet, constantly subjected to powerful earthquakes that fracture the bedrock along its natural horizontal and vertical joints, a process known as sheet jointing. These clean, geometric fractures are the primary force behind the monument's appearance. The seemingly perfect 90-degree angles and flat platforms are simply the result of massive blocks of stone splitting along these pre-existing weakness planes and then shifting during tectonic events. The other major sculptor is marine erosion. The strong currents in the channel around Yonaguni are constantly scouring the sandstone, undercutting softer layers and leaving harder layers protruding, which can create the illusion of carved steps, channels, and terraces. The famous human face, upon closer inspection, is likely a combination of these erosive forces and a healthy dose of pareidolia, the human brain's natural tendency to see familiar patterns like faces in random shapes. Geologists like Robert Schoch of Boston University, who has dived at the site, acknowledges its awe-inspiring appearance but concludes that not a single feature requires a human explanation. Every step, wall, and column can be convincingly replicated by the natural weathering of sandstone. They point out that if this were a man-made structure, you would expect to find clear evidence of quarrying, such as stone chips or debris piles nearby, or the use of tools that would leave distinctive marks, none of which have been definitively identified. Furthermore, no artifacts that are unambiguously man-made like pottery, tools, or hearths have been recovered from the monument itself, a glaring absence for what is supposed to be a major ceremonial center. This debate is more than just an academic quarrel. It forces us to confront the very limits of our ability to interpret the past. The Yonaguni monument exists in a tantalizing gray area where nature's chaos and human intention seem to collide. It is a place that defies a simple, comfortable answer. Perhaps the most nuanced and intriguing possibility lies not at the extremes but in the middle. Could the monument be a primarily natural formation that was later modified and enhanced by ancient humans? The Jaman culture was present on Yonaguni and is known to have used stone, and they certainly could have recognized the powerful, spiritual presence of this massive, geometric outcrop when it was still above water. They might have carved a few key features like the triangular pool or the staircase to augment what nature had already provided, transforming a striking geological feature into a sacred site for rituals. This theory of a terraformed natural structure reconciles the most compelling arguments from both sides, suggesting that the truth of Yonaguni is not a binary choice, but a collaboration between the Earth's raw power and humanity's enduring desire to find meaning in the landscape. Diving at Yonaguni is an experience that transcends the debate. To float above its massive, shadowy forms, to run a hand over its strangely angular surfaces, is to feel the weight of deep time and the pull of a profound mystery. Whether it is a masterpiece of geology or a sunken relic of a forgotten age, the monument stands as a humbling reminder of how much of our own planet's history remains hidden beneath the waves, waiting for the currents to shift and reveal just one more secret. Now let us travel to the sun-drenched island of Crete, to the heart of the magnificent Minoan palace of Phaistos. It was here, in the year 1908, that Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier was carefully excavating a basement chamber when he unearthed an object that was utterly unlike anything else ever found. This was the Phaistos Disc, a small, fired clay tablet just over 6 inches in diameter, and its uniqueness was immediately apparent. Both of its faces are covered, from the outer edge spiraling tightly into the center, with a series of 241 individual symbols pressed into the soft clay not by hand but with meticulously crafted seals. Think of it as a prehistoric printing press where each symbol, a walking man, a plumed head, a ship, a beehive, an axe, was its own tiny, detailed stamp. This single fact makes the disc an archaeological marvel, a potential glimpse of a technology that was millennia ahead of its time. The symbols themselves are beautifully clear, arranged in 45 distinct groups, separated by incised lines, almost as if they were individual words or phrases in a sentence flowing along a spiral path. Dated to the middle of the second millennium before the Common Era, around 1700 BC, the disc is a message in a bottle from the height of Minoan civilization. A message that, despite over a century of the most intense scrutiny, we have never been able to read. The core of the mystery is, of course, the script itself. It is not Linear A, the still undeciphered script used for Minoan administrative documents, nor is it Linear B, which was later used by the Mycenaean Greeks to write an early form of Greek. The 45 unique pictographic signs on the Phaistos disc belong to a script that appears nowhere else in the entire Minoan world. We have no other examples, no bilingual texts, no Rosetta Stone to provide a key. This absolute isolation is what makes the disc such a formidable puzzle. Without a larger corpus of text to compare it to, without any other examples of its symbols, every attempt at decipherment is essentially a shot in the dark. The text is too short for statistical analysis to be reliably effective, and the lack of any other examples means we cannot even be sure of the direction of reading. Does the spiral wind inward or outward? Does one start from the center or the edge? This fundamental uncertainty has not stopped a tidal wave of attempts to crack the code. Over the decades, scholars, linguists, and enthusiastic amateurs have proposed a dizzying array of translations, each claiming to have found the answer. The disc has been interpreted as everything from a hymn to a mother goddess, and a sacred calendar of religious festivals to a dynastic proclamation and a detailed narrative of a sea voyage. Some have even suggested it represents a list of soldiers or a legal document. The problem is that none of these translations have achieved any consensus within the academic community. They often rely on assumed connections to other, unrelated languages, or they require a level of speculation that cannot be independently verified. The disc remains a locked box for which every proposed key seems to fit but never turns the lock. Given the immense difficulty of a linguistic decipherment, other theories have emerged that challenge the very idea that the disc is a written text at all. One of the most persistent alternative ideas is that the Phaistos disc is not a document but a board game. The spiral arrangement of discrete, separated groups of symbols is reminiscent of game boards found in other ancient cultures, where players would move a piece along a path with the symbols dictating the rules of play, perhaps granting extra moves, sending a player back, or assigning penalties. In this interpretation, the symbols are not phonetic or logographic, but purely ideographic, representing game instructions. Another fascinating, though highly controversial, theory posits that the disc is a unique astronomical calculator or a geometric puzzle. The precise, stamped nature of the symbols and their rigid spiral arrangement could suggest a mechanical or mathematical purpose, though no one has yet convincingly demonstrated exactly how such a device would have functioned. The most sobering possibility, and one that cannot be entirely dismissed, is that the disc is an elaborate forgery. Skeptics point to its absolute uniqueness and the perfect condition of the symbols, which show no signs of wear, as potential red flags. However, most archaeologists firmly believe it is genuine, as it was excavated by a reputable team in a well-documented context alongside other verified Minoan artifacts. The forger theory also fails to explain why someone would create such an object in 1908, before the complexities of Minoan scripts were widely understood by the public. Perhaps the most compelling clue lies in the technology of its creation, the fact that it was stamped. This implies the existence of a full set of 45 individual seals, each one a small work of art, created for the sole purpose of producing this one object, or perhaps a small number of similar objects that have not survived. This was not a casual inscription, it was a deliberate, formal act of publication. This lends weight to the theory that the disc's message was of great importance, something meant to be replicated and disseminated, like a royal decree or a foundational religious text. The spiral itself is a powerful symbol in Minoan art, often associated with cycles, journey, and perhaps the labyrinth of their most famous myth. The Phaistos Disc, therefore, stands as a testament to a lost intellectual world. It is a haunting reminder that entire systems of knowledge and communication can vanish, leaving behind only a single, beautiful, and utterly enigmatic artifact. It represents not just an undeciphered text, but a lost language, a lost technology, and a lost way of thinking, a silent spiral of symbols that continues to challenge us to understand the mind of the artist and the civilization that created it. From the silent, enigmatic message of the Phaistos Disc, we shift our focus to a theory that suggests some stones don't just hold secrets, they tell them, replaying fragments of the past like a haunted recording. This is the stone tape theory, a modern concept first proposed in the 1970s that offers a tantalizingly speculative explanation for some of the most persistent ghostly phenomena reported at ancient and medieval sites. While it is not a formal scientific hypothesis, its application to historical locations provides a fascinating lens through which to view these enduring mysteries. The core idea is deceptively simple, that certain materials, particularly stone like quartz, rich granite, or limestone, can act like a natural recording tape. In this view, intense emotional or traumatic energy, the sheer, raw terror of a battle, the profound grief of a loss, the ecstatic fervor of a ritual, can somehow be imprinted upon the very fabric of a place. Then, under the right conditions, perhaps a specific combination of atmospheric pressure, humidity, or even the residual energy of a living person, this recording is triggered and played back. The result is not an intelligent ghost, but a psychic echo, a moment of history trapped in a relentless, mindless loop. It's a concept that resonates powerfully with reports from countless medieval castles and ancient battlefields where visitors and researchers claim to hear the phantom clash of swords, the distant roar of a long-concluded battle, or see fleeting apparitions reenacting a moment of their death, unaware of the living world around them. Consider the chilling accounts from places like the Tower of London, a site steeped in centuries of intrigue, imprisonment, and execution. For generations, guards and visitors have reported hearing unexplained screams, the sound of dragging footsteps in empty corridors, and even the faint, sorrowful sobs of a woman, phenomena that the stone tape theory might attribute to the immense suffering and terror experienced within those cold stone walls. Or imagine standing on the windswept fields near the English village of Edgehill, site of a major, bloody battle in 1642 during the English Civil War. For months after the conflict, local villagers reported hearing the sounds of phantom cavalry charges, the thunder of cannon fire, and the screams of dying men echoing across the landscape. These replays were so frequent and vivid that they were officially investigated by the King's Commissioners. If the stone tape theory holds any weight, the sheer, concentrated emotional violence of that single day could have been seared into the very land itself, its energy occasionally leaking back into our perception. This idea extends beyond battlefields to old monasteries, where the rhythmic, daily chanting of monks for hundreds of years might have left an acoustic imprint, or to ancient stone circles where the fervent prayers and rituals of a forgotten people could have created a residual spiritual charge that some sensitive individuals can still feel today. The theory provides a non-spiritual framework for these experiences, suggesting we are not interacting with conscious spirits, but with impersonal, environmental recordings of the past. Of course, the scientific community remains overwhelmingly skeptical, and for compelling reasons. From a physics standpoint, there is no known mechanism by which stone or any other material can record complex sensory information like sound and sight in the way the theory describes. While materials like quartz are piezoelectric, meaning they can generate a small electrical charge under mechanical stress, this is a far cry from storing and replaying a multi-sensory, information-rich event. Critics argue that what people are likely experiencing is a combination of psychological suggestion and perfectly natural environmental factors. The power of place is immense. Simply knowing you are standing on a historic battlefield can prime your brain to interpret ambiguous sounds. The wind howling through a crevice, the creak of an old tree, distant traffic as the sounds of battle. This is a well-documented phenomenon known as pareidolia, where our brains impose meaningful patterns like familiar sounds or faces on random sensory data. Furthermore, infrasound, which is sound at a frequency below the range of human hearing, can be generated by wind passing through old ruins or long corridors, and has been scientifically proven to induce feelings of dread, unease, and even cause visual hallucinations, perfectly mimicking the classic symptoms of a haunting. In this light, the stone tape theory, while imaginative, is seen as an unnecessary complication, a pseudoscientific attempt to explain experiences that are more credibly attributed to the powerful and suggestible nature of the human mind interacting with its environment. Yet, despite the scientific objections, the enduring appeal of the stone tape theory is undeniable. It taps into a deep-seated human desire to believe that the past is not entirely lost, that momentous events leave a tangible mark on the world. It transforms a cold, ancient stone from a simple building material into a potential witness, a vessel holding the echoes of lives long vanished. This idea gives a certain poetic justice to history, suggesting that the pain, joy, and passion of our ancestors are not completely ephemeral, but are preserved, however faintly, in the very ground we walk on. It also removes the fear from many ghostly encounters. A residual haunting is not a malicious spirit, but a harmless recording, a shadow on the fabric of time. This makes the phenomenon less about the supernatural and more about the lingering power of human emotion, a force so potent it can, in theory, etch itself into reality. The stone tape theory may not be accepted by science, but it has firmly implanted itself in our cultural imagination, offering a compelling narrative for why some places feel so intensely alive with the past, and why the stones of ancient castles and forgotten battlefields seem to whisper stories that we can almost but not quite hear. Emerging from the debate over residual echoes in stone, we encounter a mystery woven from fabric and faith, an object that has inspired both deep devotion and fierce scientific scrutiny for centuries. In the royal chapel of the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy, rests a piece of linen cloth measuring approximately 14 feet long and 3.5 feet wide. This is the Shroud of Turin, and its surface bears the faint, straw-colored, negative image of a naked, bearded man who appears to have suffered the torturous wounds of crucifixion. The figure's front and back are imprinted on the cloth as if it had been laid over the body, then folded under the feet to cover the back entirely. To the faithful, this is not merely an image, it is a sacred relic believed by many to be the actual burial shroud that wrapped the body of Jesus of Nazareth after his crucifixion. The visual correspondence is startling. The man shows wounds consistent with the gospel accounts. Scourge marks on the back and legs, a puncture in the wrist consistent with a nail, lacerations around the head as from a crown of thorns, and a large wound in the side. For countless pilgrims, the shroud is a tangible, heart-wrenching connection to the central event of their faith, a silent witness to suffering and, they believed, to resurrection. The modern scientific investigation of the shroud, however, has transformed it from an object of purely religious veneration into one of the most hotly contested archaeological puzzles of all time. The central question is brutally simple. How was this image created? The characteristics of the imprint are bizarre and, to date, unreplicated. It is not a painting. No pigments, no brushstrokes, and no directionality have been found on the linen fibers. The color resides only on the topmost microfibrils of the threads, a depth less than that of a single human cell. The image is a perfect photographic negative. When first photographed in 1898 by the lawyer and amateur photographer Secondo Pia, the developed glass plate negative revealed a startlingly clear and positive-looking image of a man, with an almost three-dimensional quality encoded in the varying intensity of the stain. This discovery catapulted the shroud into the modern era, forcing science to grapple with its existence. How could a medieval forger have created a perfect, microscopic, negative image centuries before the invention of photography? This question led to the formation of the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP, a team of American scientists who were granted direct access to the cloth for 5 days of intensive, around-the-clock testing in 1978. They subjected it to a battery of non-destructive tests using X-ray fluorescence, infrared spectroscopes, and ultraviolet photography. Their conclusion, published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, was as baffling as the shroud itself. They found no evidence of any artistic medium. They confirmed that the image was caused by a chemical change in the cellulose of the linen fibers themselves, a dehydration and oxidation that resembles the effects of a mild scorch. They could not explain how such a precise, anatomically perfect, and information-rich image could be formed by this process. The bloodstains, analyzed separately, were found to be real human blood, type AB, and interestingly, these stains were found underneath the body image, meaning the image-forming process occurred after the blood had already stained the cloth. This sequence is crucial. It suggests that if it is a forgery, the artist would have had to first apply real human blood in exactly the right forensic patterns, and then, by some unknown method, create the body image around it without disturbing the blood. Then came the moment that seemed to resolve the debate once and for all. In 1988, with permission from the Vatican, a small sample was cut from a corner of the shroud and divided among 3 renowned radiocarbon dating laboratories at the University of Arizona, Oxford University, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. Their mission was to determine the age of the linen itself. The results, announced to a global audience in 1989, were definitive and shocking. The cloth dated from between 1260 and 1390 AD with a 95% confidence level. This placed its origin firmly in the medieval period, seemingly proving it was a clever forgery created at a time when relic fraud was rampant across Europe. For many in the scientific community, the case was closed. The shroud was an ingenious medieval hoax, but the story did not end there. Almost immediately, a chorus of researchers and historians began to raise serious objections to the radiocarbon dating results, launching a second act in the shroud controversy that continues to this day. The critics pointed to several potential problems with the sample. First, they argued the piece of cloth that was cut and dated was taken from a corner of the shroud that was likely a medieval repair, not part of the original cloth. This area had been handled extensively over the centuries, and it is well known that carbon dating can be contaminated by newer carbon from oils, sweat, and even smoke from a fire the shroud survived in 1532, which could make the sample appear younger than it actually is. Some researchers have pointed to pollen grains found embedded in the shroud's fibers that are native to the area around Jerusalem, and others have analyzed dust and limestone particles that match the geology of the region, suggesting a Middle Eastern origin far predating medieval Europe. Another fascinating line of evidence involves textile analysis. The weaving pattern of the shroud, a 3-to-1 herringbone twill, was indeed known in the 1st century, as evidenced by fragments found at the Masada fortress in Israel, which fell in 73 AD. While this doesn't prove its antiquity, it does demonstrate that the cloth's construction is not anachronistic for the time of Christ. The most enduring mystery, however, remains the image itself. If it is a medieval forgery, what was the method? Over the years, numerous attempts have been made to replicate the shroud's unique characteristics. Some have proposed a technique involving a bas-relief and powdered pigment, but this fails to explain the image's negative photographic quality and its precise microscopic nature. Others have suggested a primitive form of photography using a camera obscura and light-sensitive silver compounds, but there is no evidence such technology existed in the 13th or 14th centuries, and it doesn't account for the three-dimensional information encoded in the image. The most compelling naturalistic theory suggests that a rare, short-duration burst of radiation, perhaps emanating from the body itself at the moment of resurrection, could have caused the superficial scorching-like effect that created the image. This remains highly speculative, but it is one of the few hypotheses that attempts to explain all of the image's strange physical and chemical properties simultaneously. The debate over the Shroud of Turin ultimately transcends a simple binary of real or fake. It exists in a liminal space between faith and science, a physical object that seems to defy the analytical tools we use to understand our world. For skeptics, it is a brilliant, albeit unexplained, medieval artifact that speaks to the ingenuity of human deception. For believers, it is a divine sign, a relic that science cannot fully explain away, and therefore a testament to the miraculous. And for the scientifically curious, it remains an open case, a cold case file written in linen and light, a puzzle that challenges our understanding of history, chemistry, and the very limits of what we believe is possible. Our journey ends far from the Mediterranean world and the steppes of Asia, in the heart of southern Africa, where a silent city of stone stands as a monumental rebuttal to centuries of colonial prejudice. This is Great Zimbabwe, the largest and most significant ruins in sub-Saharan Africa south of the pyramids. Built entirely of dry stone walls without any mortar to hold them together, the city sprawls across a vast hilltop and valley, a complex of enclosures, towers, and passages that was the capital of a powerful kingdom. The name itself, Zimbabwe, derives from the Shona language meaning houses of stone or venerated houses, a title that speaks to its enduring grandeur. For nearly 400 years, from the 11th to the 15th centuries, this was a bustling center of power, commerce, and spiritual life, the heart of a kingdom that controlled the gold and ivory trade flowing from the interior of Africa to the Swahili coast on the Indian Ocean. The first mystery that clouded this magnificent site was not one of its own making, but one born from the arrogant assumptions of the outside world. When the first European explorers, like the German geologist Karl Moch in 1871, stumbled upon these ruins, they were utterly confounded. The prevailing racist ideologies of the time simply could not conceive that an indigenous African civilization was capable of such sophisticated architecture and state-level organization. Moch and many who followed him concocted elaborate, fantastical theories to explain the city's existence. They insisted it must have been the work of a lost white civilization, perhaps a distant outpost of the Queen of Sheba or a colony of Phoenicians or Arabs. This refusal to acknowledge African genius led to a tragic period of archaeological plunder and destruction, as treasure hunters and amateur excavators ransacked the site in a desperate search for evidence of these fictitious non-African builders, irrevocably damaging the context that could have answered so many questions. It wasn't until the work of serious archaeologists in the 20th century, like David Randall McIver and Gertrude Catton Thompson, that the truth was firmly established through careful excavation. They found artifacts that were unmistakably and continuously African in origin, proving conclusively that Great Zimbabwe was the achievement of the ancestors of the Shona people. This revelation transformed the site from a colonial puzzle into a symbol of African pride and autonomy, so much so that when the nation of Rhodesia gained its independence, it proudly took the name Zimbabwe. Today, the central mystery is not who built it, but rather understanding the full scope of this kingdom's influence and the precise nature of its sophisticated society. Walking through the ruins, you are immediately struck by the architectural mastery. The site is divided into three main areas: the hill complex, which likely served as a royal palace and spiritual center, the great enclosure with its iconic 30-foot-high concentric wall, and a mysterious solid stone conical tower whose purpose remains debated, and the valley complex, a series of smaller enclosures that housed the city's elite. The construction technique is a marvel of engineering. The walls, some over 800 feet long, were built by carefully shaping granite blocks, which naturally exfoliate into even slabs, and stacking them with such precision that they have withstood the elements for centuries. The curves of the walls are graceful and solid, and the entrances and passageways are strategically placed, suggesting a design that balanced defense, social hierarchy, and perhaps even astronomical alignments. The conical tower inside the great enclosure is a particular enigma. It is solid, filled with rubble, and stands over 30 feet tall. Some believe it was a symbolic grain silo, representing the king's role as the provider and steward of the kingdom's agricultural wealth. Others suggest it had a phallic significance related to fertility rituals, or that it functioned as an astronomical marker, its shadow falling on specific points during the solstices. The sheer wealth of Great Zimbabwe is evidenced by the artifacts unearthed from its soil. Archaeologists have found fragments of Chinese celadon porcelain, Persian faience bowls, and glass beads from India and the Middle East. These objects, dating from the 12th to the 15th centuries, are the physical proof of a trade network that stretched thousands of miles. Great Zimbabwe was the hub of a vast economic system, controlling the flow of gold from the inland mines to the coastal city of Sofala, where it was traded for these luxurious foreign goods. The kingdom's power was built on this golden commerce, and its rulers lived in opulence, adorned with gold jewelry and surrounded by imported luxuries that signified their connection to a wider world. Yet, the exact extent of their political and commercial influence is still a subject of research. How far did their control over trade routes actually reach? Were they sending their own trading emissaries to the coast, or were they dealing with intermediary merchants? The discovery of soapstone bird carvings, which became the national symbol of Zimbabwe, also raises questions. These 8 stylized birds found on monoliths are unique in African art. They are believed to represent sacred eagles or bait lures, possibly acting as messengers between the people and their ancestral spirits, but their exact symbolic meaning in the courtly ritual of Great Zimbabwe is another layer of its cultural mystery. Perhaps the most profound, unanswered question is why this powerful, wealthy, and sophisticated city was abandoned by the mid-15th century. After centuries of prosperity, the population simply left and the stone city fell into silence. There is no evidence of a foreign invasion, no layer of ash from a great fire, no mass graves to suggest a plague. The leading theory points to environmental degradation. A city of perhaps 18,000 people with their livestock would have placed an immense strain on local resources. The surrounding forests would have been cleared for firewood, building, and to create farmland, leading to severe soil erosion and a depletion of the very gold deposits that were the source of their wealth. A prolonged period of drought, as suggested by some climate records, could have been the final straw, making it impossible to sustain such a large, centralized population. The kingdom likely fragmented, with the population dispersing into smaller, more sustainable communities, and the political power shifted to other emerging centers. The legacy of Great Zimbabwe, however, did not vanish. Its architectural style and cultural traditions influenced later Shona states like the Mutapa and Rosvi empires, creating a continuity that stretched long after the capital itself was reclaimed by the bush. The story of Great Zimbabwe is ultimately a story of African brilliance, a testament to a civilization that mastered its environment, forged international trade links, and built a city of stone that stands as a permanent challenge to those who would underestimate the depth and complexity of Africa's history. And so our journey through the echoing halls of the past comes to a close for now. We have stood before the unreadable script of the Voynich Manuscript, marveled at the intricate gears of the Antikythera Mechanism, and felt the chill of the abandoned Mary Celeste. We have traced the footsteps of the vanished Ninth Legion, pondered the fate of the princes in the tower, and stared in awe at the colossal animal figures of Nazca and the sprawling, geometric web of the Sajama Line. From the technological shock of the Ulfberht sword to the spiritual enigma of the Shroud of Turin, and from the sunken stones of Yonaguni to the silent, majestic ruins of Great Zimbabwe, we have explored a world brimming with questions that refuse to surrender their answers. This incredible range of mysteries spanning every continent and every era of human history forms a stunning tapestry of our shared yet profoundly enigmatic heritage. These are not merely gaps in a timeline, they are profound silences that speak volumes about the limits of our understanding. They remind us that history is not a neat, completed puzzle, but a sprawling, dynamic conversation where we are still piecing together the fragments, and where some of the most important voices have been lost to time, war, or the simple, relentless erosion of the centuries. Each of these puzzles stands as a monument to the fragile nature of knowledge itself, demonstrating how entire technologies, languages, and even civilizations can rise to breathtaking heights only to vanish, leaving behind little more than whispers and riddles for future generations to decipher. Yet, in the face of this vast unknown, the true story is not one of defeat but of inspiration. The very existence of these enduring enigmas is a testament to the boundless, insatiable curiosity of the human spirit. That same drive that pushed ancient astronomers to build the Goseck circle, that compelled a lone monk to spend decades creating the Codex Gigas, and that sends modern archaeologists scouring deserts and diving deep beneath the waves is the very engine of discovery. We are inherently explorers, not just of space but of time, forever compelled to look back and ask, how and why? These mysteries are beacons, drawing us deeper into the story of ourselves, challenging our assumptions, and humbling us with the realization that the past is far stranger, more complex, and more wonderful than we often imagine. They teach us humility in the face of what we do not know, and they fuel the hope that with new technologies, persistent inquiry, and a bit of luck, the next great revelation might be just around the corner. The conversation does not end here. We want to hear from you. Which of these 30 mysteries captured your imagination most powerfully? Does the technological sophistication of the Antikythera Mechanism fire your curiosity? Or are you drawn to the heartbreaking human drama of the lost colony of Roanoke? Perhaps the sheer scale of the Longyou Caves or the cryptic message of the Phaistos Disc lingers in your thoughts. Share your favorite in the comments below and tell us why it resonates with you. Let's continue this exploration together as a community of the curious. If you enjoyed this journey to the edges of the known, there are countless more secrets waiting to be uncovered. For more deep dives into the world's greatest historical puzzles, archaeological wonders, and untold stories, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an adventure. The past is filled with whispers, and we are just beginning to learn how to listen. Thank you for joining us on this incredible expedition through 30 of the ancient world's most baffling and enduring mysteries.